Very good. All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this meeting of the South Kingstown Town Council. We're having a joint work session with the Planning Board tonight. The time is 7 p.m. It's Tuesday, February 5th. Our first order of business is to pledge to the flag. Please rise and join me. Thank you. This discussion tonight is about the town council's overall goals and objectives for the coming term, but in particular we're going to be focusing on land use policy. You can see, I think it was sent around to everybody at the table tonight, sort of the goals and objectives that we had adopted previously. And there's quite a bit there regarding land use. So I think, maybe before we get into looking at that line by line and editing it down, we can just have sort of a conversation about what the planning board has been up to, what the planning department has been up to, and take it from there. Oh, yeah. So, not everybody in the crowd perhaps knows us all, so maybe we can introduce ourselves, say if you're a member of the planning board or town council, what have you. We'll just begin over that way.
Pam Rubinoff, Planning Board.
Elise Torello, Planning Board.
Joe Murphy, Planning Board.
Maria Mack, Planning Board.
Steve Damasi, Planning Board.
Peter DiStefano, Planning Board.
Deborah Kelso, Town Council.
Brian DeCruz, Town Council.
Abel Collins, Town Council.
Joe Veely, Town Council.
Rory McEntee, Town Council.
John Riondo, Planning Board. Rich Bourbonnais, Town Engineer.
Andy Tights, Assistant Town Solicitor.
Terry Murphy, Director of Leisure Services.
Chelsea Seifert, Planning Director.
And Rob Zernetsky, Town Manager.
And as much as possible tonight, let's try to speak into the microphone so this is all recorded for posterity. Maria, maybe you want to sort of begin?
Thank you. The Planning Board certainly welcomes this opportunity to have a conversation with the Town Council. As everyone knows, land use is a very broad subject. There are a lot of intricacies related to it, a lot of different topics. I know that all the Planning Board members have gone through the goals and objectives, and I was hoping that we could start off with just kind of an informal conversation about needs and issues that the Planning Board faces before we get into any details like measurable outcomes. So I don't know if any of my fellow board members want to start with some topics. I know that one of the things on the top of our list is a comprehensive community plan. We began this 2.5 years ago. Our final public presentation was early spring in 2018, and we are anxious to have it completed and have the public hearing of both the Planning Board and the Council. Comments on the comp plan from?
So I know that we've gone through the whole consultant phase. We have recommendations from that. Where is it at this point?
So we wrapped it up. We had our last open house. It was actually June of last year, and we've been slowly but surely trying to format it into a user-friendly illustrative document, which sounds like it might be an easy thing to do, but we're making infographics out of all the data and the graphs, and so it's just taken a lot more time than we anticipated. And that work wasn't in the consultant's contract. We added it on at the end, so it's just basically me doing that. It's taken a little bit longer than we anticipated, but it should be wrapped up within, I would say, a month, maybe a month and a half.
Is there a timeline when we have to have it into the state?
It's already expired. And it was expired before we started really the meat of the process. So no, the answer to that is no. The sooner the better. But there isn't any real repercussion for not having a state-approved plan. Really, the only thing that comes with state approval is that the town, the state agencies have to abide by what's in the plan, or at least be consistent with it. So they couldn't undertake a project that was inconsistent with the comp plan. It doesn't inspire state action. It doesn't make them do anything, but they have to be basically consistent. And that's really the only benefit that you get by having a state-approved plan. Until the town council readopts this plan, we will, the old plan still guides local decision-making and local action. Local adoption never expires.
And just for our edification, are there any big changes? I know the hazard mitigation plan, is that part of this update, or is that something we're still...
Hazard mitigation plan is separate in its entirety. Separate plan, which we have also been working diligently on, and you will see that actually on Monday at public hearing. So that, the way that process works, basically it's guided by a local hazard mitigation committee, and you'll hear about this again on Monday, but we'll have a public hearing, we'll incorporate comments from the public hearing, and then you will authorize, hopefully, submittal of that to REMA for approval. But yeah, it's separate.
All right, any other hot topics? I know from the council perspective, we've been discussing affordable housing a lot. And, you know, it's already reflected, I think, in the goals and objectives that we've had adopted previously. I'm sure that it's going to continue to be an emphasis for us. And I know the planning board has looked at cottage zoning as potentially one tool that the town could use. What are the other discussions ongoing at the...
We're certainly hoping that cottage zoning may be an outcome of this study, because it's one method that would allow for appropriately scaled housing that would be more affordable, yet still retain the same sense of place and quality of design that we try to achieve in South Kingstown. But there are a lot of other, I think, difficulties with regard to the state law and the way that when applicants come before us and they have a plan, they feel like they have to jump through many hoops, and they actually do. We had one subdivision that was generated by a family. They weren't professional developers. All of their family members were in that category in which they were financially allowed to become owners of the affordable units. And they really just ran up against a wall with the state entity, because this was out of the box kind of thinking. And we've had applicants who have had difficulty figuring out if they want to put their lots on site or off site. It's not, I don't think it's particularly user friendly. And we do have an inclusionary zoning ordinance, but I think many of us feel that there are other avenues that we could pursue, and we're hoping that both the study, which we really haven't had any input into up until this point, or any information yet gleaned from the consultants, helps to develop some other methodologies. I know that there are people in the community who are even talking about tiny houses, if anyone has seen that TV program, but just ways to make houses that are smaller, even if they're not within the a state program, just encouraging development that is not 4-bedroom houses, smaller houses that are starter homes, that are workforce housing, that folks who want to move out of their 4-bedroom houses can move into, things like that.
So I don't know if it's helpful. I did put together a few slides about what the planning board has on its work program, what sort of wish list is for things after we're done with what's on the work program, sort of generally about land use planning. I didn't know, especially if the new council members were up to speed with, like, what is land use planning, what do we do in the planning department, that sort of thing. I'm happy to jump in with that at any time if that's helpful for anybody.
talk about affordable housing. I'm on the Affordable Housing Commission as well. And one of the things I'm hoping that we get from the study, and I talked to Chelsea about this, is what are the other towns, what's in their zoning ordinances that encourage affordable housing? A lot of the towns have, whether it's maybe some provisions where there's some breaks on affordable housing, accessory units, or maybe some zoning encouragement for multi-families. So what I really like to see is kind of a smorgasbord across the state. What are those things in zoning ordinances that encourage affordable housing? And then we could take that whole list and we can say, how do we apply this to South Kingstown? I don't think there's going to be one solution. I mean, South Kingstown's mostly developed already, so I think it's going to be 5, 6, 7 different things that we have to look to solve that problem. So that's what I'd like to see, is that whole list, and then go through that list.
Excuse me, Maria, you said something about the fact that you guys are just getting involved now, I guess, with the process?
Up until this point, the consultant and the RFP and the parameters of the program have been largely contained with the Affordable Housing Collaborative. But we obviously want to be very involved in this because we are responsible for land use planning and developing policy. And I know that I can say that I've been talking about cottage zoning now for many years. There are currently 2 projects in the state, one in Tiverton and one in East Greenwich, that are cottage zoning types. And I know that I saw a presentation a couple of years ago at a conference that was done by an engineer and a landscape architect from Horsley Witten, and it was great because it was very thorough and it was about lessons learned, what they could have done better. And the board actually had a site visit to the Green Street project in East Greenwich. But right now, our regulations don't allow for essentially a cottage zoning permit to occur. It would have to go through a comprehensive permit, which is, as you'll probably hear from Chelsea, not our favorite methodology for projects. So we would have to develop a set of regulations to allow for this. And that's...
So, Maria, what is cottage zoning for those of us who...
It's the idea of having smaller scale units, cottages, like we used to see and still do to a certain extent along in some of the shoreline areas, 1 and 2 bedroom houses, but that are well designed.
Are you talking 1,000 square feet or 500 square feet? Like, what are we
more
talking?
Than 500.
Less than 1,000.
Less than 1,000. And on pieces of land that are zoned, what? Where's the...
There's no zoning for it.
Right, exactly.
But you're looking at what kind of...
The idea is that they're
land
also
use?
located in an area that is convenient to other uses, meaning that you can walk to the store and walk to different services. So more of an in-town kind of thing rather than, out in the most rural areas of the town.
I think the other component of that that's important is that they're usually not only small but clustered together. So you might have 4, 6, or 8 of them on a larger parcel as condos, or you might have them on separate individual lots, but they're much smaller than our minimum lot size, which is 10,000 square feet. So they might be on a 4,000 square foot lot or a 3,000 because they're so small, and that works. And our zoning just doesn't allow that right now.
And they're also designed so that you still have that sense of place. There are little green spaces contained within. Some of them have a little community vegetable garden. So again, it's about high-quality design, not just putting a bunch of small units and cramming them in together in a space.
Did you want to say something else, Brian? No, I think I'm good. Any other comments from council members about sort of where they want this conversation to go? Okay, Chelsea, maybe now's a good time to sort of give us a planning 101.
We're going to work through the slides as they exist, and we'll try to get through this stuff that I think we've already covered as quickly as we can. Again, tonight conversation is really about just land use, and eventually we want to get this evening to a discussion about the long-term goals that the council has and the short-term objectives that the council sets for the next couple of years. So the long-term goals are really 20 years out. These are things that happen in the long run. They're not things that we're going to do anytime soon, but it's important for us to get there. We get to those long-term goals, that 20-year, 30-year vision, and speaking to Rory yesterday or the day before, my description of this objective, or this objective for this meeting, the description of the goal is, what do you want your grandkids to see when they come to visit? What happens 20 and 30 years out? The objectives are the short-term way of getting there. Goals are wants. They are wishful, they are aspirational, they can be naive, they are timeless. The goals are just long-term, sort of cloud concepts. On the other hand, an objective is a short-term. In our case, 2 years makes sense because it's the term of a council. Short-term, specific, very measurable, attainable, and they are realistic. They're things that we can actually get done in the time that we're contemplating. This is a graphic that I've used a couple of times, and some of you have already seen it. The thing that I think is amazing about this image, it's a satellite image of the eastern seaboard from Washington to Boston, and you'll notice that right in that circle, that little spot is Green Hill, and this is Matunic and Charlestown, to either side of that. Narragansett Bay is right up here. But what we see here is that the land use pattern that you have tried to achieve over the last half century has worked. Unlike every other municipality on that eastern seaboard, the night sky is not lit up here. This is one of the few places where the forest still meets the sea. That's an amazing accomplishment to date, and that's from my reading of the goals and objectives that the council has set for itself previous to this session. That's the goal and objective that we want to continue to achieve. How do we keep the night sky dark?
Okay, I'll take over. Okay, so I was thinking just a quick overview of planning, sort of planning 101, I guess, and then what we're working on, planning board, planning department, and a little bit about how our town is currently zoned and how it works. So generally, land use planning is directing the use of land to provide for orderly, considerate, and appropriate growth, development, and conservation over the long term. This is what we do day in and day out in the planning department and the planning board. And really, there's sort of two segments to it. There's long-range planning, which is the comp plan, our village and special plans, any zoning ordinance updates that we do. And all of that deals with all of those different topics you see popping up on the screen now. So it's anything from mix of uses, housing, economic development. We want them all to integrate and work together. And then we also do current planning. So that's the project review side, that's CDBG, that's the Historic District Commission reviews for compliance. And when we talk about that side, it's really about ensuring compliance with rules and regulations, adhering to best practices, coordinating, and then really mitigating any impacts of development on the ground. So long-range planning, I thought we'd just go through quickly what we're currently working on. So we talked about the comprehensive plan, which is nearly complete, the local hazard mitigation plan, nearly complete, and then we're just about to start the Route 1 stewardship plan, which you all authorized us to have a new committee to guide that work. From a zoning and regulatory side, we have the multi-household and inclusionary zoning project, which is the study that Maria mentioned, which you all, or I suppose the previous council, authorized us to go out to bid for. We awarded it to Horsley Witten Group and Union Studios, and we just had a staff-level internal kickoff on that in mid-December. So they're right now working on the first phases. And really the idea of that project is to look at opportunities throughout town for what we call multi-household development. So it's any time you have more than one unit on a single piece of land. It could be a duplex, it could be cottage zoning, it could be something completely different that we've never seen before. But we really wanted to see where it makes sense, given our current villages and our current development pattern, to sort of increase our density in a way that is appropriate for South Kingstown. That's also going to look at inclusionary zoning, and inclusionary zoning, that term means when you have a subdivision that is 6 units or more, you have to include 20% of them as deed restricted for low and moderate income households. And we have that now in place, and it doesn't seem to be working as well as it probably could. So we want to look at that too. I know we've all talked about zoning for sort of the transition from government institutional use to some other, reuse. So we're working on that. We have the coastal area, coastal building height zoning, which will have public hearing with the town council at the end of February. We're looking at new zoning regulations relative to food trucks because there's a definition change and regulatory change at the state level. We're working on that. And then we've been working on an update to the subdivision and land development regulations for a while, trying to get the processes clear and the standards clear more than anything. So that's what we're working on right now. We have sort of a wish list of projects that we've all, at the planning board, has talked about. Some of them make their way into the comp plan. I think probably at the top of that list is Old Tower Hill Road and what we're going to do there. During the comp plan process, we talked about the intersection of Route 138 and Route 1 and what that becomes, whether it could be like a gateway district. The planning board is really interested in commercial form and massing standards for Wakefield and Peacedale, right, so that you're getting the form of those buildings correct as they come in. And then there's just generally some standards in the zoning ordinance that just don't make sense as written or need some clarity. So we have a bunch of those little things too. And then there's also things that we've just brought up as ideas that need a whole lot more discussion, but we've talked about West Kingston, we've talked about bed and breakfast events and standards around that. And then really, how do we preserve that rural character that everyone loves so much through maybe changes in zoning or other things that we can do? And again, we don't know what those are, but it's always sort of in the back of our mind.
Excuse me, Chelsea, can you tell me what massing standards are?
Yeah, massing is, if you're how your building is constructed. So it's whether it articulates. Does it have transparency? Is it just a flat wall, or is there some variation in the facade? Is it a single column with something that juts out, or is it just a big square? It's really about how it looks from the outside. So you might say, why are we doing so much zoning right now? And I think the easy, simple answer to that is that what we consider orderly, considerate, and appropriate is changing. The thought on that is changing in the planning world. Historically, since the early 1900s, towns everywhere have used use-based zoning. And that is really where your zoning districts focus on a single land use type and on separating those uses. So you have commercial separate from residential separate from government, so on and so forth. And you get this sort of segregated land use pattern. And that is what most of South Kingstown is. You can see from this map, we've sort of grouped the categories together. All the yellow is residential. We have open space zoning, government, institutional, industrial, commercial. They're all use-based. There isn't a whole lot of other considerations except what happens in those zones. So the thought on this is really transitioning it to something we call either place-based or form-based zoning. And the zoning districts really focus on the physical characteristics of the place and the performance of the development and how it interacts with its neighbors, rather than the use inside the building. So the underlying principle with a place-based zoning approach is that you sort of have this spectrum of places from the absolute most pristine natural to the most urban city, and there's a variety of places in between. And you try to figure out which places you are trying to create or to become or to preserve, and you regulate for that. So you could have, and South Kingstown certainly has, a variety of places just within its own borders, and we try to figure out what place is what and how we enhance that place or preserve it. So the regulations really under place-based zoning focus on form over the external form over internal function, and they focus on performance and how you mitigate impacts rather than just separating those uses. So really the question with place-based zoning is what should it feel like when you walk down the street? And you try to regulate for that. So the feeling on Main Street is different than the feeling on Old Tower Hill Road. And we have to think about for Old Tower Hill Road, well, what do we want it to look like? What do we want it to feel like, and try to get there through our zoning. And we do have a couple of instances of this in South Kingstown right now. We have the Kingstown Road Special Management Overlay District, which is up on 108. And the entirety of the Route 1 Special Management District is this sort of place-based zoning where they're focused on the form of the place rather than the uses within the building. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, so this is important, and what Chelsea's indicating, and by looking at the current place-based zoning, or even if you look at land use zoning map today, so the yellow is residential, effectively. So not surprisingly, a majority of what is in the town is residential, from R10 to R200 and some other mixed use in there. Next is government open space, and you can see that by the green, and that's the next highest category of zoned land in the town. Next is government institutional, so from the University of Rhode Island to town-owned properties, etc. And of course, then you have along Route 1 and of course, coming into the communities, industrial, commercial. And not surprisingly, or maybe surprisingly, is if you look at the commercial, all of the commercial designations, commercial highway, commercial neighborhood, commercial business, they represent less than 1%. For this discussion, we'll call it 1% of the town's land is commercial. Industrial, no different. Industrial 1, 2, 3. Those industrial properties, again, less than 1%. For discussion purposes, we'll call it 1. So really, when you look at the town's current land use map, 1% is commercial, 1% is industrial, but the majority is residential, probably in the neighborhood of close over 60 to rank between 60 to 65%. So it gives you a sense of, again, the challenges when we look at the land use map, R10 and the regulations and the flexibility that we don't have under a place-based zoning type philosophy. And I realize that's probably new for a lot of people, but it's something that we need to start thinking more about.
Actually, after I asked Carol, who's our GIS coordinator and our map guru, any map you see in town comes from Carol mostly. I asked her to pull those percentages specifically, so I actually have them. Residential is 75% of our town. Industrial is 1, almost on the nose. Commercial we have is 1.1. There's mixed use, which is very minimal, 0.7, and usually it's mixed use that's mostly commercial with a tiny bit of residential. GI is about 5.5, and we have 17% zoned open space.
And to add to John's comments, one of the reasons that the commercial highway district, Tower Hill Road, is so important to us is that it does represent a very small amount of commercial. And although the conversation has been around adding a mixed-use component to that, I think we all have a concern that we need to make an investment in that area, that corridor could be much more vibrant with the appropriate incentives and tweaking of our regulations. We all know that there's been a demise of retail, and certainly brew pubs and restaurants and banks are doing really well, but we also would hope that 10 years from now, that won't necessarily be the case. And about 15 years ago, there was a study done for that area by a company called Daler, and they had some recommendations as to how to improve that area. Everything from, it's not just how the buildings look, but ingress and egress and safety and making it more attractive to customers. The Economic Development Committee did a study in which they did a survey of the business owners, which was very worthwhile. And we're hoping that that momentum can continue so that we can do something to revitalize that area. And in fact, there may be a way to tie Main Street into that as well. As council members know, there was the Saugatucket study also brought forward by the EDC, and we're hoping that that can transform the area and make it that much more vibrant. So we're really interested in those areas. And as John said, the amount of commercial and industrial is very low, and the industrial space is actually getting filled up very quickly. So that's something that we want to be really thinking about going forward.
So would you think that we're going to need more industrial space then if it's getting filled up quickly?
I think we hope so. And, you know, when you think about industrial, it doesn't necessarily mean heavy industrial smokestacks. It's some of it's tech, some of it's light industrial. So there's a lot of opportunities. West Kingston has now a very limited amount of space left in industrial. There's the concern that although URI now has a partnership within the Schneider building, that is a large space, and if they move out of South Kingstown, that's something that we want to try to be on top of.
The other fact that, and I did this research a while back, so it's a couple of years old, but if you look at that 1% commercial and the 1% industrial, it generates slightly over 10% of the town's revenue. So I think, yes, and I don't think we have to, we're not, and by all means, we're not looking at turning ourselves into a Warwick or Cranston. Let me just put that out there. But I think we have to consider, and if you look at Schneider Electric as that type of new industry, it's very high tech, you know what they do, born from APC or they purchased APC outright, you know what they all did. And there's no smokestacks, it's just good, high paying jobs. And there's very little property for people to even look at us, look at South Kingstown in that vein to come here and say, I want to be here.
I think
if you look at the village at South County Commons, there's RPS, which is a software development company. Again, very high skilled, high paying, and they pay their people very well. And those people are coming from Southern Mass, Southeastern Mass, from Woonsocket down. When the job is there, paying what it pays, they will drive. And the 1 hour commute is not unusual. Maybe it's unusual for Rhode Islanders, but for non-Rhode Islanders, it's not unusual.
The only other thing I would add to that really quick is that when you talk about APC or Schneider, you talk about the hospital as an example, and URI, those are our top 3 employers in our town, and there are a lot of people in our town that live here that work for those companies. Losing Schneider would be not a good thing for our town. So,
and I have this is a rather old copy, but it is a study that was done that I think is still valid, other than perhaps some of the actual numbers. But it's about the cost of community services and how open space, commercial, industrial relates to cost to the municipalities as opposed to residential. So I'll pass this around.
Chelsea, I had a quick question. You said something about 17% open space. And the reason I'm asking that question is because in my mind, I always think about 32% of the town.
So the thing, the 17% is what is zoned open space, not what is actually conserved. It is correct that about 32% of our land mass is a deed restricted open space.
And then we have about 30-something% that still could be developed, correct?
So I'll just go back. I think I had one more slide, and I will try to stall until Rob gets back, because his comes after mine. So really, Rob asked me to think about what we see are some of the key challenges to development in South Kingstown, and the things we think about basically on a daily basis. And right at the top there is maintaining that rural character, right? A lot of our land that we consider our rural area outside of our villages is actually zoned for like an acre lot, which I don't think anyone would really consider as a rural character. And if you think about that scale, the sliding scale between the most pristine and the most urban, we really want the form of our rural to be rural. We want it to not look suburban. We want it to look like farmland and large acre zoning, because that's what people in South Kingstown, at least what I've heard from them, everyone loves that. So really trying to manage that character and maintain it. There is a desire, and the comp plan has said this for decades, to infill in the villages and keep our development into the villages. But as we're currently zoned with our minimum lot size of R10, which is a 10,000 square foot lot, and if you want a duplex on that lot, it has to be 15,000. Under that growth scenario, we're mostly built out in the villages. So really, if that's the case, we need to think about how we change that zoning to increase infill development. We just talked about small amount of land zoned for commercial and industrial. South Kingstown has very high land costs. There's a large proportion of our coast that is very vulnerable to natural hazards and sea level rise. Our infrastructure, our sewer lines, water lines are aging, and they have limited capacity, even if we do want to grow in town. Our circulation system is old too. It was built for less traffic volume, less people on the roads, less cars on the roads. And I think we hear it nearly, if not every town council meeting, nearly everyone about vehicular and pedestrian safety. So those are all the things that we think about and try to address and mitigate as we go through the both long-term and current planning.
And of course, the land use challenges reflect or are the same in some cases as the policy challenges we face outside of land use. They contribute to the larger policies. Aging road infrastructure, aging facilities means that we've got to think about what to do with facilities that we're disposing of. It means we have to think about where new facilities might be located. The university exoskeleton is a problem about the isolation of the university from the town. There's not a real seamless interface between the university and the town of South Kingstown. It's more isolated than most universities of its size from the community where it's located. South County Hospital's constraints are real. This is a land use problem. They are in a neighborhood where they're constrained, and they have been for a very long time. Figuring out how to deal with that is a major policy issue for the town. Slow urbanization. That night sky has happened because we've been able to sort of slow growth, but it is happening. And we're seeing, if we look at the development pattern for the last 20, 30 years, about half of the development happens outside of the villages and half of it happens inside the villages. We are slowly seeing the parcelization and development of that green area. Traffic safety is a function of where people are trying to get to and from, and we have a major issue there. Our public housing program is challenged. Affordability is a huge issue here in South Kingstown. We've already have had part of this conversation tonight about affordable housing, but it's not just, Chelsea calls it capital A versus lowercase a affordable housing. We have an affordability issue in terms of land acquisition, in terms of development costs. It's not just the availability of housing for the workforce. Commercial development imbalance, the 1% problem is a major issue for us. We really are sort of built out completely on commercial development, and that means no more of it. And if they are major contributors to the economy and if they're major contributors to the revenue, we need to think about that. And then the aging population question or issue is an interesting one for the town. If we're going to continue to be an age-in-place community, we probably need to think about facilities and services that are different than the ones we have today. If we're going to be even older 20 years from now, that has implications for what we do in terms of services and activities. Climate change is a major issue as well. It all comes down to sort of the dichotomies. What is it that we want to be? Do we want to be more rural or suburban? Do we want to be inclusive or exclusive? Do we want to have a greater focus on residential uses or commercial uses? It's all of those dichotomies that come into play. And we can talk about where we are in each of those in terms of each variable, in terms of the value and what percentage we are relative to every other variable in the scheme. But the real issue is change and what's going to happen there, if anything. This is just a very quick picture of what drives growth and the things that we can change with regard to growth. The things that are in dark green are things that we can actually do something about, things that we have some control over. The things in blue, with the exception of the facilities and programs down by the schools, are things that are really sort of beyond our control. We can't really change commutability. We can't move South Kingstown closer to Providence, but we can make sure that there are more businesses close to South Kingstown. So the things that we can do, we should be doing, and our policies ought to be contributing not only to better land use directly, but should be contributing to an environment where the land use that we want works. And this is the pattern that I think has emerged over the years. Chelsea talks about the sort of most natural and the most developed areas in any zoning scheme. And South Kingstown's sort of a nice natural experiment. That night sky happens because there's been this undeveloped area in town. You've got the central villages, Wakefield, Peacedale, and Kingston. And then you have this rural band, this green area around those villages that has grown up and been maintained for literally hundreds of years. That pattern is the core pattern that has emerged, and probably the pattern that we're looking to preserve. That has design elements to it, rural design elements, things that are natural in materials, the design of the rural areas, the things that we'd like to see in those rural areas reflects a rural aesthetic. And the things that you'd like to see in a village reflect a village aesthetic, right? So that's getting to the form and what is it that you're looking to achieve in each of those distinct areas. What form are you trying to emphasize? Tonight's objective, yes, not goal, but objective is to look at the land use goals and objectives, and that is one of many sets of goals and objectives that the council has set. The two goals that the council has in its current set are these: to support a land use development model that maintains the rural small town qualities of the community, acknowledges the town's historic villages, promotes sustainability, preserves open space and agricultural land, and enhances the health of our citizenry. The second goal, again, these are the long-term, 20-year sort of objectives, is to support appropriate scaled aquaculture in the salt ponds. So those are the two goals. So those are sort of the two big long-term objectives. And I'd pause here and encourage discussion and suggestions on what we might do around these goals, these two big, whether there's more to be had, whether there are other goals that aren't well fleshed out or represented in these two, or how these might be modified. Is there anything about these goals that needs to be changed?
I don't know if this is about the goals, but one of the things that I learned years ago when I ran and was unsuccessful was how folks wanted, or a lot of folks wanted, South Kingstown to remain a bedroom community. The concern, well, that's really important, and I get it and I understand it, but I think we need to find a balance, because if you continue down that path, the financing of the town just solely falls on the homeowner, and we don't end up with a diverse tax base. Granted, we don't want it to look like Warwick or even Westerly, in some cases compared to Westerly. But at the same time, I think it's important to think about how we can incorporate industrial space or economic development within our communities or within certain pockets, other pockets in our town, so that we can have a viable town that's economically strong and not just always falling on the homeowner. Because when we look at our tax base, that's where the majority of our money comes from. The other thing I just wanted to add really quick, when we were talking about land use and the fact that we have this whole entire ring, I think I wanted to keep in mind that we live in an aging forest, so we need to also manage that as well.
So I guess my question about that is there a theme that comes out of that? What's the thing that those conversations sticks with you? What is it that folks meant when they had those conversations with you?
Well, I think it's a variety of things. I think it's, it's people's experiences over time, what they're used to. one of the things that we look at now that's caused issues or problems, I don't know if they're issues or problems, but when you talk about having school-age children in our town, there was a time when many towns felt, let's go over 55 because they're not going to tax, certain, our schools, et cetera. But then that creates another problem on the other side where you're going to have to worry more about other services, as people get older. But then the folks that are buying in the over 55 are kind of driving up pricing a little bit, but also at the same time, you have folks that are aging in place. And when you age in place, what that does is it causes kind of a bottleneck where people don't end up moving into our town because there's a process, where people move from a starter house to another house, and they might downsize, but I think a lot of folks that are getting older are staying in their current home. At least that's the feeling that I'm getting.
So should the goals reflect a desire for diversity of ages? Is that?
No, it has nothing to do with ages. I think it just has to do, when I talk about that, aging in place, I think you can't really do that, but it would be nice in an ideal world to have a balance. For the longest time, some of the zoning was really pushing for that over 55, which was pretty evident.
You might recall we just recently, I don't know, last summer, brought forth a zoning amendment that came out from the planning board's recommendation to eliminate some of that 55-plus requirement in certain situations because we saw that as an outdated zoning. But I think what you're really talking about, Brian, is having housing types for a variety of people and a variety of needs. And right now we have a whole lot of single family that's large, 1,800 plus, and very little of anything else. And so when you get that bottleneck, when you have that person who's in their 70s perhaps and is ready to move out of their 1,800 plus square foot house, there isn't any place for them to go, so they just stay. So it's not necessarily, sorry, you can't hear me. It's not necessarily that that we want to pick the ages of our community. Right. It's really that we want places for everybody. We want units for everybody, every type of household that.
Like an example, you talk about where do we want, what do we want the town to look like when our grandkids come to visit? I think it's also important. How do we want to make sure that our kids can afford and young people can afford to live in our town?
Right. So again, the goals are really long-term. We don't have to be very specific. This is more gut-level stuff. What is it that, and I think I am hearing a sort of diversity of age, diversity of units, so that you've got a place for everybody as an element. That's a good element. That's a good thing to build on for a goal. That's a thing we can work with.
Yeah, but also when I was referring to the commercial space, it was more about also having more diversity in that as well. 1% is a very small percentage of our town, and I get that. It's important, but it would be nice for folks to be able to work in our town, as an example, rather than having to go to Providence. In an ideal world, I'd love a shuttle, from Providence to here, so it would make it easy, a high-speed train as an example, but that's not going to happen anytime soon.
Again, these are wishes, they're aspirations. If we want to lobby for that kind of service, that's something that we should be thinking about. We shouldn't say it's not possible, therefore we're not going to dream it. Let's dream it and see if it's possible.
I think often when we read goals, we generally agree that the goals are good goals. What's tricky is the methodology. How are we going to achieve those goals and the steps that we take to
And
do
I just
so?
wanted to jump in. I did hand out this thing that you have that I realized does not have a title on the top, is all of the draft goals from the comprehensive plan, the draft comprehensive plan. We pulled them out so that you'd have them for your reference and your use.
Thank you. So just from that conversation, it seems like it might make sense to incorporate something about diversity in this land use goal. Perhaps something also about supporting the local business community. Commercial activity is not really mentioned explicitly in that statement. So I think those two topics should go into the goals. I mean, it is, like Maria said, it's one thing to say nice things in our goals. It's a whole other
The
thing
next
to
5
develop.
slides get into the nitty-gritty. The rubber hits the road with the objectives, which is tougher.
I would just like to, I know we've talked a lot about the land use and the housing and the commercial, and then I look at the second goal that's currently on the town council goals about supporting appropriately scaled aquaculture uses in town salt ponds. And it comes to my thought, especially within the packet, that there were two letters there to discuss the long-term leases of 2 marinas on the salt pond. And so I guess I would like to open up the discussion perhaps to make that a little bit more holistic, that maybe it's more about appropriate use on the salt ponds that takes advantage of aquaculture, low-impact boating, et cetera. And we do have zoning of water, so we do have the ability to do that. And then one of the things that is on the planning board or the town's docket is to update the harbor management plan. So that is on a list that we've been talking about as well. So I would like to open that up for discussion.
I just wanted to add a couple of things on the diversity issue, and I think we need to be mindful that diversity means not only economic or age-related, but ethnicity as well. So there's 3 components in diversity to me, and I think I'd like to see us put as our goal to incorporate all 3 elements: age, ethnic, and economic.
I'll speak on the importance of the diversity of the age for a moment here. I think it's important, that we try to attract people in the mid-20s, people like me, people who are young professionals. The direction we're going right now, that is not the case. We are seeing a declining percentage of people in that age group not retained here. I think it's because increasing housing prices. I also think it's because of the lack of jobs in this area. There has to be a focus on economic development. I do believe that in SK, a lot of people do like preservation and conservation of land. I think it's important to people here. People don't want to like Warwick. I agree with that. However, we do need to place some focus on this. We know taxes are going to increase in the forthcoming years. We have to do something to combat it. We have to look at ways to influence new business owners to come down here, invest in land and buildings, and try to figure out ways to really influence new creation of jobs, whether that be from existing business owners or whether that be from new businesses coming into town. But right now, the housing stock is not there for the young people, the jobs are not there for the young people, and we have to do something to look at that and really focus on that. It's important to the longevity of this town. I really believe so.
So, I'll say a few things about that. I don't disagree with you. I have 2 children that couldn't afford to stay in this community. I've said it before. Some of it is market strengths or market forces that drive that. We know that the average price of a house in town is simply out of reach for a young family. We also know that the cost of government puts it a little further out of reach. So in my case, they found houses in other communities that were more affordable. And it's hard to raise 3 kids and pay a $400,000 mortgage and $125 a week in property taxes. I get that. So market forces are driving some of that. So I don't know how much we can really have an effect on that, because the free market is the free market. Having said that, yeah, we should certainly try. I mean, some of this cottage zoning that you talk about is intriguing to me. This, land use is why I ran for this office. So this is all sort of interesting to me, but not my suit. And I also think that we have to carefully, we have very deliberately and carefully zoned and planned in this town, and we've got a great product from it. But I think that if we're going to drive this to the next level, I don't want to use the word relaxed, but I don't think of another one now. Be less restrictive. in a careful and deliberate way. I think there's a way to pull it off and still have a great, beautiful community. So there's that sort of balance that I think needs to come to the table. And I've got more to say, but.
Chelsea hit on it a little earlier when she said that, our model has been one housing unit per one parcel of land. And in South Kingstown, a parcel of land is going to be $150,000, $200,000 minimum. So that kind of drives what it gets developed. I think that, my own kids and knowing some of their friends getting out of college, a lot of their housing solutions are really solved by more than one unit per parcel, whether that be apartments or condos. And I think that's one of the things that we have to be a little more diverse in order to provide housing that's a little more affordable, not necessarily deed restricted, and as well as can serve a more diverse population. I think we really need to look at that.
I think also a big part of that would be looking at the density requirements in certain areas, because if you can make the density more in line with some other places in our state, I think more developers would be willing to build, that one-bedroom condo or two-bedroom condo or something similar to that on a parcel of land.
Could we, I know you said that in December you had sort of a staff meeting to look at the study that's ongoing. Could we have like an update, sort of where that?
Yeah, so if you recall, I don't remember if we ever sent you the final scope of that project. But basically it has 3 phases. We called it understand, educate and envision, and then innovate. 3 separate steps, right? So the first step for the consultant is really just to understand our rules and regulations, our current land use pattern, the current restrictions, our population demographics, how we're changing, how we're not, all of those things that go into being able to craft a new rule. So they kicked that off in December. They have committed to getting us sort of the results of that back in February, in this month. So we'll have that then. The next step is sort of, we're calling it envision and educate, where we do a larger community-wide engagement campaign where we not only get feedback from everybody about what character is appropriate and how land use patterns can or cannot change and make everyone get everyone on the same page with that, but also to educate about housing and what affordability is and what it's not, and who lives in a deed restricted unit, and what the affordable prices are, and all of those things that people are sort of mystified by right now. Nobody really knows, well, what is the affordable sales price? What is your income to be in a deed restricted unit? All of that stuff. And then after we do all that and we sort of build a community vision about what our housing should and should not look like, the consultant will go back and sort of draft some zoning changes for us and for us all to consider. And part of that will not only be changes to the zoning ordinance itself, but a full set of design guidelines for the new housing types that they will propose. And I wanted to comment on I think, what Joe said. And it is a little bit about being more relaxed, but it's flexibility and paying attention to the details that matter and not the ones that don't. And so for me, it's things like, maybe it doesn't matter if there's 3 units on a single 40,000 square foot parcel if those units all look like one large manor house, right? And it's paying more attention to, like I said, the details that matter and get you that community character and that place you're trying to achieve, rather than the details that don't affect the place.
Yeah, so I guess, and I said that relaxed wasn't the right word. Yeah. In all aspects of government, I think you need to create the conditions that make things happen, right? So if the conditions are that it's too restrictive, the best bang for the buck is going to happen, right? The developer is going to build the thing that makes him the most money. And he may be a little more flexible if the conditions were better.
So that's a perfect way to express the problem, I think. I was down at the Land Trust the other day speaking to Julia Landstreet, is it? And she reminded me that a third of the community is deed restricted and protected. a third is developed, and it's that last third that we're talking about here. What is it that we want to see? What conditions do we want to put in place with regard to that third that is not protected open space and not yet developed? And part of what I think Chelsea and the planning board are doing is trying to set the rules so that you can take some of the pressure off that 1/3 so that it can remain open and can become open space by increasing the density, by increasing the utilization in what we now consider to be that 1/3 that's already fully developed. Because if you can do infill, it's not fully developed. If you can do something to get in between the spaces that we consider fully developed, we've relieved the pressure on that 1/3, maybe not the whole 1/3, but some portion of it, so that you end up with the preservation of the space that you're trying to get. So the question is, what are the conditions? What are the things that you want to see? Is the preservation of that 1/3 really a high goal, or is it something we'd rather see developed into industrial use? And that's okay. I mean, whichever preference the community has is the one we should pursue. But again, my bias is on that map. When you look at that night sky, you look at it and you say, this is a phenomenal thing. I mean, it really is amazing.
And I think I would add to that. I think, Joe, this is partially your point, that developers are businesses in every sense. They're going to do what makes sense for them from a profit perspective. And if we can create the conditions where it is more profitable for them to do infill on Old Tower Hill Road than it is to do a 13-acre subdivision in the middle of nowhere, then they're going to go with what's more profitable. And so it's about changing zoning and doing potentially other things, right? Is there a way that, we've had property owners on Old Tower Hill Road come to our office and say, hey, has the town ever considered like a stormwater management district so that we don't have to deal with all of our stormwater on our own parcel and maybe we could spread it out? So I think there's other things besides zoning, but that's exactly it. You have to create the condition where they are incentivized to do the thing you want them to do rather than the thing you don't want them to do.
And I'd like to add to what Chelsea just touched upon, stormwater. We hear this and we see this all the time. We have people coming to our meetings who are incensed about the fact that their property is flooding. And they are concerned that when you have additional development, that's going to exacerbate the problem. So we have been very aware of this, and we also think that it's time for DEM to make revisions to what they consider the 100-year storm, because the 100-year storm is no longer a 100-year storm. It's occurring much more frequently. So when we look at projects and how they're designed, we really want to be able to design them to mitigate future problems with stormwater.
I'd say just one comment to add to what you said, Rob. I think it's important that we not view the land that's been developed in South Kingstown as fully developed. I think we can always redevelop land as it passes from one person to the next. And so we have to also create incentives that encourage people to, take that house that maybe no longer makes sense in the context that it exists in now and build something larger that can accommodate more people. I also think when we're talking about incentives and setting the table, it's important to do that with zoning and regulatory schemes, but another thing that makes things happen in the real world is money. And the town has to consider finding a way to generate money that helps affordable housing happen.
That's exactly right. And there are options like tax treaties for people who build cottages in their back garden. If you're going to put a low income, moderate income unit in your back, we're not going to tax you on that unit for a period of time. There are ways to incentivize people to do the development, to build out those properties that aren't necessarily particularly expensive. We're not generating any revenue right now in those back lots. If somebody puts an affordable unit, if we were to say for a period of time that's not going to be taxed, we're not losing anything. We have some additional services that we have to provide, but the marginal cost there's not great.
The only other thing I wanted to add, just a comment really quick that I thought of when we were talking, whatever changes that we do make in the future to go towards our goals and objectives, I think we also need to keep in mind that there are some other factors that sometimes keep developers from wanting to develop in certain communities. And in my business in the past, I've heard people say, I don't want to build in South Kingstown. It's too difficult. It's too hard. I think it's changing a little bit, which is good in a way. But at the same time, those are the types of things. How easy is it if you put a certain guideline in place, like Maria was mentioning, someone shouldn't have to jump through 6 different hoops to make that happen.
That's right. That's just right. So I guess a couple of other questions come to mind as I'm listening to the conversation. One, do we have any preference or any sort of long-term vision on rental versus ownership? The home ownership rate in the United States has been 75% for a long, long time, I think. We're probably higher than the national average. Do we want to stay higher than the national average? Do we want to have more rental units than we have currently available? Is that a thing that we ought to be focused on in pursuing land use policy? Do we care how people occupy units, whether they're owner-occupiers or renters?
I mean, if we want more young people in town, we're probably going to want more rental housing available. I think that is where people start out in the journey of housing. So, and I think it makes sense in particular because we're, a college town in some ways, or we are a college town. Let's be clear about that. So, and a lot of that college housing, of course, has gone into Narragansett, which is fine, but I think we could probably have more in South Kingstown.
Yeah, I think a couple things about that. If we do it like we've done it in the past, I don't think it's affordable, right? I think, for instance, if you were to go look for an apartment today in South Kingstown, because it's a tourist community, because it's a college community, it's frankly not affordable housing. I think you're probably 3-bedroom unit in South County Commons or 2-bedroom unit in South County Commons. A lot of us wouldn't consider that, a place to start. I don't disagree with you. That's where the younger community naturally starts. But I don't think it's necessarily so in South Kingstown.
Joe, I was trying to find a client, short-term housing at South County Commons. They were full, which was amazing to me, especially with the rates that they charge.
And I don't mean to pick on
just an example.
one landlord over another. That was an example. About anywhere. I think unless you're finding a duplex house that's in the middle of town, that may be more affordable, but it's not $1,000 a month place in South Kingstown.
If you're looking at a 3-bedroom, you're probably looking at $1,800 minimum.
What I think is we talk about looking at Old Tower Hill Road, maybe Main Street, and developing more commercial industrial space.
Can you use the microphone?
That we should encourage commercial on the first floor and encourage more residential on the second floors. That's not for commercial use. Most people don't want a second floor because people won't climb the stairs if there's no elevators available. So if we, West Kingston, the Village, along 138, back when they had the Village studies, they talked about how most people in West Kingston, they had no place to go for coffee or a restaurant, and they wanted to have a center of town. And again, that's mostly residential units along there. And if we, tweaked our zoning to allow commercial with the residential above, we would get more of a village center feel to some of those. And again, we talked about Narragansett Avenue off of Old Tower Hill Road. That's a good segue from commercial to residential there that could allow some expansion of our commercial zone. We just have to look at those, and we have to pull the trigger and do it.
And just so council members know, on our long to-do list is implementation of the village master plans, which we have 4 of, and the one that Steve just referred to was West Kingston.
At issue here is that we have the perfect storm of rental dichotomies. So we have a summer community that they want to come and spend a week or a month or the season, and we have a built-in audience for September to June. So rental properties automatically here lend themselves to that transient, seasonal rental, and I don't think that's part of a long-term goal, is looking at transient. But the issue is, how do we combat that when we add more rental units, where the dollars, it's going to be lucrative for the owners of those apartments to rent to students, keep them full in the off season, and then do the $1,000 a week thing in the summer. So I think we really have to be mindful as we add apartments what audience we're targeting.
I'm assuming as part of the affordable housing study that part of their fact finding will be doing their own research about what millennials and older people in general would like to do as far as owning versus renting. But I would also like to see more of a community survey to be done to see what this community is looking for as far as rental versus owning, because what I've been hearing is that millennials want the flexibility to pick up and move if they need to without having to sell a property, and older people are probably looking at that to some extent as well. So I'm not sure if this community's needs and wants necessarily mesh perfectly with what, the larger, national trends might be. And just in place of feel and what do we want the community to look like in general. I think we really need to get as much community input as we can on that going forward.
So another question that's come up during the course of the conversation is, what do we want, 20 years from now, the relationship between the village forms, West Kingston, Kingston, and the university? What's that interface? What is it ideal now, or is it one that's got to change? What's the interface that we're looking for between the university and the town?
Well, I think, in my opinion, right now, I think our relationship with the university is getting better. It's slowly getting better. I wish it would get better really quick, but we're working on it, and I think we're making a lot of progress, especially within the last year. For me, one of the things I would like to see is the bike path finished. I think that could bring people into town and have people that are in town go to URI and use some of the services that are there. Ideally, I think one of the things that we really struggle with in our town and when it comes to development is transportation, public transportation. If we could put more pressure on, say, Ripter as an example, to add a few more routes in our town, I think that would be tremendous, and it would help with people being able to move around. A lot of us have vehicles, but I think there's also a lot of us in town that don't for a number of reasons, either because of age or just never driven before or other reasons. So I think we have to take that into account, and I think any community, needs a good transportation system as well.
Also, designing walkable communities. You hear that term a lot in land use planning. The Tower Hill Road area would be perfect if you made it safer, easier to get to and from, added the residential component without compromising the commercial.
When we talk about Tower Hill, we're talking about the main stretch between the main exit.
Carlia.
Yeah. So, correct me if I'm wrong. That's also one other place where we have the most accidents, I think, on that road.
Old Tower Hill Road between Route 1 and 108
right.
Is the highest accidents, as I recall.
Right, and ideally, you'd like to see that redesigned, but I think the issue there is that you have businesses on either side of the street, so how do you make that
We have been, so it was on DOT's, it's on the tip to resurface Old Tower Hill Road, and we all did a road safety assessment of that same stretch of road. I think it was this time, probably last spring, sorry. And as a result of that, because these things sort of lined up appropriately, DOT has agreed to make some design changes to Old Tower Hill Road as well. So I think we're still sort of working out the details of that through the T-Squared RC, and the BPAC has taken a look at it. But I think we'll see as part of that just plain resurfacing project, because we sort of pushed them and said, hey, this could be better. We're going to get likely a bike path or bike route on that road, a striped bike route, bigger sidewalks, and some intersection improvements that will make the traffic flow better. So those are the types of things that we, when we see those opportunities, we just need to jump on them. The URI bike path is under construction now, so that should be well underway, or at least I think the completion date is prior to next September, so that'd be great.
Do you recall, because one of the big things with that was how to cross over?
Yeah, they decided on what they call a hawk signal. It's like a three light signal that changes how it flashes as the pedestrians wait. It changes, and then it changes to have them slow down, and then it changes to a stoplight. And Rich is here; he might be able to explain that better than I just did. But it's basically just a crosswalk with like a 3 light symbol that transitions. No tunnel, no bridge, too expensive.
And hopefully it'll be easier to navigate than the dreaded rotaries.
So just to make I'm liking the dialogue about having, about how to incentivize and maybe look back at some of the things we've put into place to date and be more creative with some of these incentives. And I think, Chelsea hit one that we did way back in 2007, beginning of 2008, which was the 20% bonus density, that's the town giving extra lots to a developer, if he or she are developing more than 6 lots. And we've seen that value, unfortunately, immediately after we passed it, of course, was the fall of 2008. We know what happened then, and the economic engine went into first gear for quite a while. But also our accessory apartments. We also work to increase the square footage for accessory apartments, which the councils went along with, and that's for owner-occupied properties who have a secondary building, like a garage, and want to turn it into an apartment for, again, as part of the affordability issue. So maybe there's something there that we can look at. And Rob hit something, that I'm familiar with, which are TSAs. And in the economic development language, that's tax stabilization agreements. And the town has had one for quite a while, but I can tell you it's very difficult to even qualify. And as a result, we have a big zero for any company that's ever applied has never received it. So I think that's an opportunity that we have to look at. And tweaking that, I think the existing ordinance talked about jobs and was interested in the metric of jobs, and you know what? Towns are interested in property tax. The state's interested in income tax. So you get rid of the job metrics out of that ordinance, and you begin to look at what impacts the town, which is the tax base and the ability to levy a property tax. That's where I think that we could shine again. So that's another one that I think we should take a look at, and maybe even expand it into residential. Not just keep it for industrial or commercial. So,
and to add to what John just said and Joe referred to, having infill that enhances the villages, enhances the town, but yet is in a balanced fashion, I think is important. And I don't think you can have a conversation about 20 years from now and build out scenarios, which I hope will be part of the affordable housing project and how they look at potential outcomes, because I don't know how long it's been since we've done any kind of a build out scenario. I don't think we've been made aware of.
We did it as part of the comp plan.
Because we haven't seen any details. But going along with that, as you add infill and enhance your town, I think the conversation has to also include open space. And we've heard references to 30 plus percentages of open space, but there's different kinds of open space. There's the open space that, for example, the Nature Conservancy will buy 100 acres and they do it to preserve biodiversity, and nobody's allowed on that property. And then you have smaller areas that are useful for different things. The Noise Farm is in the works. Recreation. I know from a personal perspective, I've been very interested in recreation, and both for youth and adults, it's often hard to come by. It's hard to get playing time on fields. And when we had the initial conversation about government reuse, we talked about Curtis Corner, and there's no way we're going to give up those fields because we need them. So I think that needs to stay an important component, as well as the fact that if you're going to increase density and add infill, it's really important that those folks, whether they're in an affordable housing unit or otherwise, commercial and everything, have some access to some kind of green space, pocket parks we've mentioned in the past. So not these huge, vast areas necessarily. And also, I think it's important to understand that we have a lot of properties enrolled in the Farm Forest Open Space Program, and most of those properties are well beyond the 15-year limit, meaning they're getting a tax incentive to stay in the program, but they can leave at any time. So it kind of puts us in a tricky position because we don't know when that might happen.
Maria, do you have an idea of the acreage that's in that program?
I know I have folders with it, and I'm sure we could.
Curiosity. Yeah.
But yeah, they're all well beyond 15 years. It's a lot.
It was a useful program. It was a useful tool for us for many years.
Right.
Yeah.
You're going to get people to re-sign
There's no incentive.
Right, and
their age or their family dynamics and family estate plan.
so I believe that in the 32% figure, that is only land that has been deed restricted as conservation. So the farm, forest, and open space is in addition to that 32%, just so everyone is
So that
clear.
percent is all conserved in perpetuity.
Correct.
But I'd like to reiterate what Maria touched on, is we have a lot of open space in this town. And I'd really like the town to look at any further purchases of open space that they're open to the public. Some of the tracts of land over the last few years that have been purchased with the help of the town and the local land trust, it's basically kept private land. It's part of the deal is they'll donate it, you buy it, but nobody can go on it. And again, because of the volume of open space we now have preserved in this town, I think we really ought to prioritize any further development or purchases of open space that can be used. If it's going to be public tax dollars purchasing it, it's got to be open to the public.
So I want to come back to the university thing, because even if we don't want to include it as a goal, some guidance here would be helpful. One of the things that has recently happened is the university has been, or a portion of land on the north side of the university has been identified as an opportunity zone, which is a place where folks can invest and avoid capital gains on the sale of other assets. So there's a real incentive there for folks to invest in development. Again, for me, the interface between the university and town is, it's stark. I mean, there's just no commercial interface between the town and the university campus. If we're going to encourage the development of that sort of town university boundary, that sort of commercial space between the university main campus and town, it seems that there may be an incentive there for the university to start working on it. We've been reached out to a couple of times in the last couple of months by the university to inquire about whether or not we have any interest to talk to them about how development on the opportunity zone or in the opportunity zone would happen. I'd like to get a sense of what we think we'd like to see for development around the university, if anything. Right now, it is literally the case that our zoning does not allow a lab to be constructed adjacent to the university. That's a strange thing. You certainly don't see bars, and you don't see restaurants, and you don't see the types of facilities that you typically see around flagship universities in New England and everywhere else. So is that something we want, or is that something that we should be carefully, deliberately, cautiously, aggressively, recklessly pursuing? How do we want to deal with that whole set of issues?
I think, if I remember the opportunity zone correctly, does it go all the way down to sort of It goes all,
It's the entire census tract that URI occupies. So it actually goes all the way down to 138. It's bound by Old North Road and Plains.
Plains Road, yeah.
And then it goes a little bit to the west of Plains Road because it goes all the way up to like where that wetland is on the edge.
And so the university's plans are to put transportation facilities and move to the Plains Road side. And again, I haven't heard anything very detailed from the university about what they'd like to see over there other than a bus depot and transportation resources. But that would be an interesting, I mean, potentially you're now connecting the university to West Kingston.
right, and that sounds promising. I think the rest of the opportunity zone seems to be pretty well developed. When you get into Kingston, there's the whole historic district, so you're not going to be doing too much there. But yeah, if we could talk to the university about commercial development tying into West Kingston and building up some transportation infrastructure around there, potentially connecting with the train station, I think down the line, hopefully we'll get commuter rail coming down into Kingston. I think that's a great discussion to be having with them. I don't know how the rest of the council.
Is that where they would put a hotel if they wanted to put a hotel?
It's not where they originally planned a hotel, but it may be easier, particularly if the community is amenable to that idea.
And is it a given that there would be a payment in lieu of taxes agreement if that were to transpire?
I don't think it's a given, but I think that certainly is something that they understand we would want to talk to them about, and it's certainly something we'd want to talk to them about.
Just to follow up with Rob's comment about the opportunity zone, I think timing is good. So you're right. The state has designated 25 of these opportunity zones, of which one is the University of Rhode Island lands. But also the governor, through the Innovation Campus Bond program, and she did her, back in December, there were 3 awards given. And one of them was based on an agricultural project, which is being sited at Peckham Farm. The intent is to take a look at Peckham Farm, develop it more for greenhouse-type uses, not just for growing vegetables and fruit, but also looking at the science that goes behind greenhouses, all of the systems that impact the growth, whether it's wintertime, summertime, all of that. And that's technology. And I think, so there's money coming in. So of the Innovation Bond project funding, which was $20 million precisely, 12 was divvied out, and that 12 generated about $120 million in match, and the largest match share came on the agricultural project. So now they're calling it the Agricultural Innovation Center, and that again has an opportunity to take farming to a whole different level, and I think that's an opportunity that could really, not only with the university's help the community, because I agree, you could negotiate a payment in lieu of taxes, as Maria Mack indicated. Quonset development has gone under that mantra for 30 years. So that, and the town of North Kingstown just watches that curve go up and up and up, because as more development occurs at Quonset, more taxes are generated for the town of North Kingstown. And so there's an opportunity here. If, with proper scrutiny and proper negotiations that could benefit the town of South Kingstown in the same way.
And this Ag Opportunity Zone is, I think, going to be wonderful. We, in the comprehensive plan, and I think throughout the state, there is a move to really encourage agriculture. And the average age of farmers is they're all getting older, and it's very expensive for young people who want to get into agriculture to buy the land. So this is going to hopefully act as a catalyst to get more students and others who are interested in the field.
All right, we've spent a lot of time on goals and we got a lot of objectives, but before we move on, I want to just come back to Pam's observation about the aquaculture. Is there anything about this goal that we should restate?
Well, I think Pam was right that it's very sort of narrow when we're looking at the totality of activity that goes on the water in South Kingstown. So it probably, we could either add something to that or a whole separate goal about recreational uses and other commercial uses.
Natural resources.
To that point, we have 2 letters in our packet from the local marinas, and I see that they're here tonight and basically discussing their leases.
Yes. I just gave Terry a heads up. She's going to be up in a second here. I think that's right. This is one of those interesting points where the goals and the objectives really come together because we're contemplating entering into 2 leases for the next 25 years. At the top of Point Judith Pond, we have 2 marinas that sit on municipally owned land, and the question becomes, is that the use that the town wants to see for the next 25 years? This one actually turns out to be both a goal, 25 years, and an objective, because the leases that we have on those properties right now expire in 4 years. So we have to actually make a decision on these. We don't need to do that tonight, and you can't vote on it tonight, but some guidance would be useful.
Well, I think we have 2 established marinas down there that are in 2nd and 3rd generation ownership, and they're viable businesses. They provide a service to the town. If they want to expand, they need a lease. And I think that's from a business standpoint. I think they need some direction on where we're going to go so that they can make plans for the future.
Right. Terry, you want to walk us through the history here?
So as a little bit of background for the property at Marina Park, there are currently 6 leases on the water side of Marina Park. And they're all under lease terms that vary in terms of when the expiration date is. There are 2 that are coming up soon. They're both in their 5-year extension period right now. In 2001, the town council did establish a lease policy for the properties at Marina Park, and one of the reasons for the policy was really to make sure that the structures and the businesses or operations on that property maintained the town's character, the intention of having businesses that are longstanding and also basically align with the culture of the town overall, particularly along the waterfront. They restrict in terms of height on those properties. The buildings themselves are owned by the lessees, and the basic policy, really the philosophy was that the town council supports long-term business use of those properties that have a marine related function or business purpose, for which right now those do. There's 1 restaurant. And so as a liaison to the Waterfront Commission, I've also put this before the Waterfront Commission, and they, at this point, the last position from the commission was a sense that they would support continuing the businesses that function down there as they are now, unless they choose not to, and then potentially an RFP for competitive bidding type of situation.
So what is the advantage to the town that we lease these properties and we wouldn't sell the property to these folks and get out of the lease business? Well,
there is the Public Marina Special Management District section of the town ordinances, And the intent of the district, right, as it stands now, is to preserve and enhance the historic uses of the town-owned waterfront properties as a marina basin at the north boundary of Point Judith Pond. It's intended to provide for marine-based commercial uses that are complementary to the historic land use pattern of the area and the public access and recreational resources of the Marina Park facility. The district recognizes the practical requirements necessary to the operation of marine-related and other businesses in the public district in balance with the recreational function of Marina Park. So that they pay a market, what we presume at this point is a market competitive rate on a lease. I think that is one of the items that would have to be looked at with renewing a lease or extending it for a longer period of time, is going back and doing due diligence in terms of a market appraisal of that property.
One answer to the question is we have greater control. You know, to the extent that we are going out and looking for tenants, we get to choose our tenants. We get to choose the type of use that goes out. If we were to do a request for, or if we were to go out and sell the property, I'm not sure that we'd have the ability, and in fact, Andy, you might be able to help me here, I'm not sure we'd have the ability to sell only for a particular use. We'd have the underlying zoning.
Right.
We'd have less control over who ultimately occupied the land.
Right, but if it's zoned commercial waterfront, I would assume that's what the zoning is there, commercial waterfront, I would think, that would limit the uses, right? So
Yeah.
I guess my question is, why is the town in the business of leasing property?
Deb, you're right. It's zoned Public Marina Special Management District, and there's only 6 uses that are allowed in that district. It's Marina Yacht Club, nonprofit community park or playground, boat storage, restaurant without alcohol, restaurant with alcohol, and accessory entertainment to restaurant or bar by special use permit only. So yes, the uses are restricted, and that was going to be one of my sort of questions for the group. Generally, I've heard several people sort of mention that places like Newport have done really great things with their public waterfront, where they have a larger mix of uses, where it's not just marina and restaurant, but it's marina and restaurant, and maybe there's office or residential mixed into some appropriate ratio. And again, I don't know that that's what we want or what we don't want, but to get some guidance on whether this sort of special management district needs to be expanded in some way or changed in some way would be appropriate.
Right, so my concern is, first of all, I don't know why the town's in the business of leasing property. I mean, it's prime property, let's face facts, but the second point is, if a business is going to remain there, they need 20, 25 years. I mean, you can't, we need to give them the opportunity to invest in the property the way they need to, but the return on that investment is going to take some time. So I think we either lease long-term or say, it's up for sale. I just don't...
Right. Historically, the leases have been 20 or 25 years.
20 with a 5-year.
Yeah.
So 25-year leases.
They need that
at
time
20
to make
plus.
that investment back.
That's
and
correct.
make it worthwhile.
That's correct. And that's why we're contemplating 20 or 25-year leases again.
So if I can address kind of the more macro questions first about why do you want to be in the business of leasing? I mean, the question is, how much control do you want over the waterfront? It's not like you have a large waterfront here. This is this pretty small area that you've got close to the villages until you head down to the ponds. So you have a lot more control in the destiny and the uses if you're the owner of this property. There's only so much you can do with various zoning controls. And even then, as indicated with the goal here, I mean, if you apply the goal to what you're thinking, I mean, the answer is, okay, this is very nice, you have a marina, but you're a pleasure boat marina. Our goal is to support aquaculture. We want a marina here that is supporting aquaculture. We want a base for an aquaculture use is what we're looking for. It may not be the most lucrative to us, but it fits in with our goal. And if you're the owner, you can absolutely do it. An example that was not many years ago, the town of Barrington tore down their police station. They were talking about putting a restaurant on the site. And the answer is, if you sell it, no matter how much you zone it for, you can't stop a Dunkin', if you allow a coffee shop, if you allow a Starbucks, you can't stop a Dunkin' Donuts. You can prohibit drive-throughs on both or neither, but you can't have that little change. People said, it'd be nice to have a nice family-run restaurant, but we don't want any chains in there. Well, if you sell the property, you can't do that. If you rent it, you can. As the landlord, you can have that different level of control. The other question, getting to your thing about the terms, is I do agree, whatever way you do it, you should probably have a long-term lease to whomever you're renting it so that they have the ability to finance the improvements. And banks are generally going to want to see usually about 25 to 30 years before they're going to do it, sometimes even more. The town of Bristol recently bought about an acre-and-a-half piece of property right in the heart of its downtown waterfront, in between the state dock and a park. And there were a couple of old historic homes on that property up against Ames Street. And the main reason the town bought it was to gain the open space on the waterfront and connect, so it would follow their comp plan to have a boardwalk and a path all along the waterfront, so you can walk all the way along the waterfront. And so that was this perfect connector between these two pieces. And then they did go out, and in fact, they leased the two historic homes on a 65-year lease term. And I've also done 99-year leases. And that's the advantage where you have as a town, that the town is still going to be here 99 years from now. You have no idea what your successors 100 years from now are going to want to do with the property and what needs they're going to have for the waterfront properties. But by doing some sort of long-term lease, whether it be 25 or 65 or 99 years, at least at some point you know it's going to come back to the town, and your successors will have that ability to determine its fate in the best interest of the town, not just on a pure economic basis.
So on some level, the question right now is, are we at a point in the town's history where another 25 years makes sense, knowing that we've preserved that right for a future council and for the town in the future, or should we pursue some other strategy? Are we at a point in time where we want to see offices, or we want to see, a different use down there?
We have a view shed, we have a scenic highway along there now, so we get to see the salt pond. It's part of the character of the town, and I think we should continue to operate the way we have been.
I agree with Stephen. I think we generate a lot of activity in that area. I think it brings a lot of tourists. I see no reason that we stray away from that. I think we have 5 to 6 businesses down there that are successful, that do well, primarily in the summer times. But I know a lot of those are still used in the off seasons as well. I see no reason to not renegotiate a long-term lease with Marina Park. Is that right? So I think I give you the okay, Rob.
Yeah, so I'm sort of in between everybody, I think. I don't think that's unusual. My initial reaction is, Debs, why are we in the business of renting? However, we have some successful businesses down there that I think it's their want to continue to lease. And if that's the case, and I'm sure that we'll have a meeting about what to do with this, I see no reason not to extend it if that's their wish. I don't think there's any downside to the town as a whole to extend the term to meet their needs. And again, my preference would be not to be a landlord, but you have some willing tenants that are successful there, and I want them to continue to be.
Yeah. So, does renegotiating these leases prevent some of the other discussions from happening? You said potential other uses that we might look at. Is that determined by these two leases? It seems.
So certainly, if we enter into a lease, we want to do so in good faith. We don't want to enter into negotiations and then say we've decided to do something else. Sorry. I think that we have to know that we are in fact going to commit this land to this use for the next 20, 25 years. Or whatever term, makes sense. But if I'm going to sit down with the property owners, it would be my intention to mirror the terms that they've had, not to change the lease term again, because banks rely on some stability in the leasehold, because that is the term that has been expressed in letters as the term that they'd like to see. So, yeah, I think we have to commit to 25 years of marina uses on those two parcels, which does mean that we've got either end of the road occupied by marinas. You could only do something different between the two. You couldn't go to either end of that road.
Yeah, I wonder if, I guess to your question, if you had a lease in place with the marinas, I don't see any reason why the special management district couldn't add uses, right? As long as it didn't sort of take away the ability to continue doing that marina use, you could potentially give more opportunity to do different uses without negating what you already agreed to with the leases. Does that make sense? So
Yeah.
it seems like you could always do more. You could change the zoning ordinance to have a bigger mix of uses, especially in between or a marina park area. I think you just probably couldn't say, no, you can't do a marina anymore.
Right, so I think we need to really speak to the marina operators and say what auxiliary uses would enhance your profitability maybe and your ability to make the property work in 2020 as opposed to 2000.
A couple of the lessees sublet. There is a clause in the lease that allows them to sublet part of their buildings, and one or both of them, both of the marinas do that currently. So Java Madness.
Right, but expanding on the use. So, I mean, obviously we have restaurant sanctioned within those subleases, but maybe there's another use that we're not privy to at this point, we're not aware of, that the operators would like to use as well to expand the
That's actually, I hadn't thought about it in those terms. I see what you're saying. Are there uses that they'd like to engage in that they cannot currently engage in because of the zoning? No, there's nothing that would prohibit us from expanding the list of uses that are permissible.
Okay. Well, I think that is an interesting conversation. I do think the marinas are very well suited to that area. Obviously, they've succeeded this long. But I think it's worth thinking about, is there space? I mean, it's a very constrained space, too. So I don't know how many more uses we're going to get out of there productively, but maybe there's something more productive than is currently in between, or maybe there is a little space for, a small residential/commercial space with offices. I don't know.
So it's beyond the scope of the conversation tonight, but I will point out that may change the nature of a negotiation. If we're contemplating broader uses, we may need to do something about soliciting different offers from the marketplace. It's beyond tonight's scope, but so if we're negotiating with marinas for marina uses, we've got two marina operators on the ground. I'm not worried about whether or not there's some other operator who's going to come in with a better offer. If we're saying marina or hotel, giving the hotel option to the current tenant is probably not going to fly. We'd probably have to.
I think my intent was to speak to the marina operators and say, what needs do you have that are restricted by the current regulations in place? Perhaps they have something that enhances the marina, not a totally different use, that we need to expand.
Got it. This is very helpful. I think I've got the guidance we need to proceed. Thank you.
Can I just add one other thing that's so unique about this area, that while we're looking at the district, not necessarily the two marinas, but the district, is the public access that's available both visually for somebody to go down there and just sit in their car on a cold day and have a cup of coffee from their car, to being able to use the boat ramp and obviously all of the customers that do go to the marinas or the coffee shops. So I would just hope that we could, this is really unique in our town and in this area to be able to have that kind of use continue. So I would hope that whatever we continue with and expand upon, I mean, the URI community sailing, that's just very wonderful. So I would just encourage us to make sure that the public access is maintained and or enhanced by additional uses and continuance of those leases.
I want to sort of wrap this around to our previous discussion, right? So everything that we've been talking about is really figuring out what place the Marina Park area is and what it wants to be and how we shape the regulations to make it be that, as opposed to it's only marina use, right? It's really about how it performs as a district and what the regulations should be. And that sort of just wanted to highlight that that's an example of how zoning is just changing and is changing over time.
We actually have a series of 6, 9, I think there are 10 objectives. This is going to be a royal pain in the butt if we try to edit each of these. So I'm not sure that's how the council is going to want to proceed tonight. But what I would suggest is that we go through these objectives, make ourselves aware of them, and that we get sort of a thumbs up, thumbs down, go back and tweak these, and we'll prepare edited versions for council approval at some point in the future. If we can just get sort of a sense of whether these objectives are the right ones. Knowing again that what we're looking for is not what we've got in most of these, which is continue the effort to. Knowing that what we're going to come back to the council with is, if this is the sort of path you want us to pursue, within the next 2 years we shall as opposed to continue efforts to. So this is the first. It is continue efforts to update the community comprehensive plan. Obviously, our objective here is to get this done in the next 6 weeks, I think. But again, I think this is one that we continue, and we do want to have this done. Begin implementation of the updated comprehensive community plan, including actions associated with bringing consistency between the plan, the town zoning ordinances, planning for natural hazards, climate change, energy, and providing more affordable housing options. I think what I would suggest here is we're going to be breaking out these various things. We're going to have completed the hazard mitigation program. We're going to pull out that affordable housing piece. That'll be the zoning remake that is underway and will be completed within the next 2 years. So I think we're sort of on path to not just continue, or begin, but to actually complete those objectives. Continue implementation of the recommended strategies developed for the village studies of Wakefield, Peacedale, West Kingston, and Matunic. Maria noted that this is one of the planning board's objectives as well. I'd like to have a little conversation about what the thoughts are about how we ought to achieve this. Timeline, thoughts on how we achieve it.
Yeah, I think this one's a little bit, and even the second one too, they're both a little bit fuzzy, because I don't know that you have the necessary background that you need in what implementation means, right? Like, what do those village plans actually say we should be doing to implement? We can talk about that with the planning board if you'd like, and sort of pull out maybe specific implementation tasks and bring those back to you. Other than that, I without having those plans to sort of give you right now, I don't know that I could tell you. The West Kingston Village Plan says specifically do this thing.
But if you get a chance and you read the vision statement for each of those plans, they're really well written and really well to the point.
So I guess one question about, ultimately the goals and objectives document that the council adopts, is this one that we'd rather sort of defer to the planning board, or is this something that you want us to carry forward with input from the planning board in the final edit of this objective?
Kayla just reminded me, or told me maybe, and I heard it for the first time after she's told me multiple times, that as part of the comprehensive plan update, the planning board actually went through all of the recommended actions for the village plans and pulled out the ones that they thought should be implemented and put them into the comp plans action program. So it might be easier than I originally thought to get you that sort of list of what those might be.
Could I just take us back to the last one in terms of energy? An objective I would like us to consider is looking into the feasibility of municipal aggregation. And that doesn't have to be necessarily just SK. We could work it to team up with other municipalities in the region. Or, I certainly think URI should also be brought into that conversation as a major energy user, but it's probably a foreign concept to a lot of people, but I've been working in Massachusetts doing solar development, and the communities where they've instituted municipal aggregation, people are saving, I would say, 10% or more on their electricity rates, and I think that that's something our residents would enjoy as well. So that's an objective that I would like us to look into personally.
So we'll put meat to that and have an actual actionable thing in the edit.
So just quickly on what Abel just said, there was an article recently, Rhode Island's utility rates in general. First is Hawaii, I believe, Alaska, then Rhode Island. So that's something we need to be cognitive of.
The next objective, investigate amendment options for the zoning ordinance to allow for mixed-use development as appropriate within the town's unique and distinct village centers. This is actually part of the Houston, what is it? The Whitney, what's this? Horsley Witten, thank you. The Horsley Witten study.
Whitney Houston study.
Yeah, the Whitney Houston, exactly. So this will be an action item that is well underway. Investigate regulatory options for revitalizing the old Tower Hill Road commercial corridor, including the potential of allowing a greater mix and intensity of uses as incentives for incorporating a more pedestrian-scaled development pattern. Here, what I'd like some guidance on is a verb other than investigate. What would you like to see us do other than investigate?
Yeah, I think every time we talk about economic development in town, we spend a lot of time talking about this area, and a lot of these changes that are sort of envisioned in that statement. So, and I'm sure some of the study is going to look at this as well. But yeah, I agree. I think we need more action.
Develop instead of investigate.
Get rid of investigate regulatory and just develop options.
Create conditions that potentially allow. Create conditions.
So I think that it is realistic for us to say that we will present the planning board and council, and for the purposes of this document, that we will present the council within 2 years with regulatory options. I think we can commit to that. That's what we're going to do. We're going to actually present you with regulatory options.
Maybe 2 years or less. That's a long time.
Yeah, 6 months.
No, 6 months we cannot do. That we know. We'd love to, but let me tell you, I would love to get that done faster than anything else we're trying to do, but it's just not possible to do it responsibly. It's going to take us... Yeah, it's just going to take us a little more than a year, maybe a year and a half to get that done. It takes that long. Continue working with the Partnership for Preservation efforts to preserve open space and farmland within the town. Well, yeah, that one may not need any... I mean, it's the continuing working with that is the sort of inactionable action, right? That's sort of a tough one to. I mean, we're happy to work with anybody, but it's not a commitment of any meaningful consequence. It's not specific and it's not measurable. It's attainable. Yeah.
Rob, can I even just ask a question, clarification? Is the Partnership for Preservation still in existence?
We just asked each other.
I don't know. To be honest with you, I've not worked with them, so I don't know.
To my knowledge, they have not been employed recently.
Kayla has.
Hi, everyone. For those who don't know me, I'm Kayla Gray. I work in the planning department. So we actually spoke about this briefly during the comp plan update about this Partnership for Preservation. And it doesn't really exist in the formal name as it does now, but the members of it, the idea was to utilize the conservation organizations in town and the land trust together with the town to identify the areas where we wanted to preserve open space and farmland. So the formal name of that group, I don't know that actually does get together anymore, but the players at hand are all still there. And in the comp plan discussion, we talked about the importance of keeping that in directing where we want to target our open space.
The idea of it and the name of people associated.
So perhaps an objective here that simply speaks to preservation, and I guess the question then would become, what is it that the council would like the town administration to do? What specific steps would you like to see us take over the next 2 or 3 years to continue preservation? Noyes Farm comes to mind. There may be specific projects, but there may also be general objectives that you want us to focus on.
One of the things that David Flanders and Jay Parker, who's our other planner who's here, if you guys don't know, that's Jay, talked about just today, actually, was having the Conservation Commission take a look at our open space funding and acquisition policy, which was last updated in 2005. That could be an objective if you are so inclined to have an updated policy that reflects the values, the open space and natural resource values that have been articulated in the comp plan, right? The draft comp plan has sort of a list of those resources that are important for the town, and priority areas for the town to preserve. And what David Flanders and Jay and I talked about was updating that policy to be more reflective of those values. That could be a measurable and attainable and specific objective to get you closer to a preservation goal.
So is that...
Preservation or having those type of spaces kind of in the urban core. Is this so? And that goes along with our other conversation relative to housing, increasing density, maybe having more than one unit per parcel. As you do that, right? I mean, that hasn't been as big of an issue because we've had one unit per parcel and people typically have a yard. But as we look at increasing the densities, that becomes a bigger issue because people want to be able to walk. If they don't have a yard and they have children, they want to be able to walk to it, not get in their car and drive to Tuckertown Park, but be able to walk to a small park nearby for their children.
Terry, you want to comment on that? I think that's right. I think this is sort of around the kinds of things that we want to do. I mean, the Saugatucket study is one of those things that might be actionable in some way. Certainly, all of the work that Terry and her crew do to maintain the parks as open space available to the public, that's important, but it's more than just continuing to work. I'm looking for something concrete for us to be doing in the next.
That has to match up with our plan for land use. So if the intention is to increase the density, let's say, in Wakefield, and then maybe we have to look at using some of those taxes as generated to purchase a house lot, which can make a park out of, so that where we increase the densities, people have a place to bring their children home.
That's right. If you're going to increase density in Wakefield, you want a Saugatucket linear park. Absolutely. And you'll probably want one anyway. But right.
And also, if you really want to preserve farmland, you have to think about what incentives could assist agricultural operations in town, whether it's an overlay or multiple things, looking at it beyond just that very simple statement.
So I say that because then it changes the statement from continue to working to maybe work towards matching what our changes will be as well.
Does open space funding just deal with the purchase of open space, or does it deal with the infrastructure or developing that space once we purchase it?
So there's a couple of answers to that, I think. The bond money that was issued, somebody's going to have to help me with dates here. The open space recreation bond. Yeah, 2008, there was a bond in the amount of, I want to say, God, anybody? Yeah. Yeah.
There's like 2.5 million left, right, or something?
Well, that bond sum was for open space and recreational facilities. Depending on how you count that money, that sum, 2.5, 4 I'm sorry, do you remember the original sum? I'm not, 6 million. The original $6 million that was authorized, a sum equal to that has been spent. And it was for open space acquisition and recreational uses. There is earmarked in our revenues funds that go to open space acquisition, and only open space acquisition. It's $450,000 a year, if I'm remembering correctly. Much?
So that's from the real estate conveyance.
That's correct.
I think I like Chelsea's idea of maybe, so are you talking about reworking sort of that matrix that we score potential open space projects?
We talked about sort of a whole bunch of things for the Conservation Commission relative to this. One would be reworking all of those criteria, right? There's criteria, and you get up to 3 points per criteria. We also talked about are there other things that policy should address besides just fee simple acquisition? Right? Are there things like pocket parks that the town wants to invest in that policy could apply to? Are there things like acquiring land along right-of-ways for stormwater improvements or more tree planting, or where those things are lacking? Are there other ways, and I don't know what they are, and we sort of asked the Conservation Commission to think more about this, but other things that open space policy should address rather than just people coming to us asking for money and then we assess it. Is there a different way to use that policy? Is there a different way to sort of assess that criteria? I don't pretend to know what that way is, but the CONCOM could, as your advisory body on those matters, give you a recommendation.
Well, I personally would like to see that scoring formula be updated for, new goals that the town has and different ways of preserving open space. I think, it's also an interesting time. There are land trusts that exist specifically to encourage affordable housing. So do we draw them into some of those conversations as we're looking at affordable housing at the municipal level? So I don't think that necessarily belongs in that goal, but something else.
Yeah, it doesn't belong here, but it's an objective.
And then I do think that we do have to, an objective, I've talked about this campaigning the last few times, is, it seems to me we created that real estate, or we devoted the funds, generated by the real estate conveyance tax entirely to open space acquisition fund. And the idea originally was that, that would be a continuing stream of money to pay off the debt service for acquiring land, that we bonded money for. And in practice, we just haven't used the bonded money because we've been generating enough revenues through the conveyance tax that we haven't needed to. And I think that's fiscally very responsible, but it's also not the way it was intended to work originally. So I think it makes sense to go back to that original concept, to have some money devoted to paying off, that debt service as we're acquiring really special pieces of land for the community, but also using potentially some of that conveyance tax revenue to do other things in town. Affordable housing is my big idea. I know other people probably have other ideas, but I think if we can bifurcate that revenue stream, we can have still money to meet that intended purpose, and then also some money to meet some of our new goals.
So what I'm hearing there, and it's an actionable, measurable objective, is to develop a plan, a strategy, and present to the council a plan for bifurcating that that real estate conveyance tax revenue stream for preservation. And actually, I would suggest what I'm hearing as well is the idea of affordable housing relieves pressure in some ways on the open space as well, because if you're making it easier to build in the infill in the village, then there's less demand for the open space to build on a green field. So there's actually a connection there. I don't know what it is yet, but there is a connection there. There's some way for us to make sense of that. I think we can work with that. I think we can figure out an objective, and present something to the council that deals with bifurcation of that revenue stream.
Yeah, that would be, and I think, it can be designed similarly to the way it was designed for open space. We can have these metrics that we want specific affordable housing projects to come in and meet, so we score them the same way we score an open space project, something like that. Anyway, just
those are two objectives, and I think we can work with them. One is to rework the scoring criteria, and the other is to bifurcate the revenue stream, or develop a plan and present a plan to the council for bifurcation.
Excuse
Part
me.
of my question was, can some of that money be used for the enhancement of the open space that we've purchased? Like the Knowles Farm, for instance, that's going to need some work to develop that. Where does that money come from? Does the town have to take that out of its general fund, or can that
This farm has been
subsidized from the open space fund?
So that particular property, the Noyes Farm property, the Recreation Commission and the Parks and Recreation Department is planning through the capital planning, capital improvement plan to put away funding for maintenance, development for that particular property, trail maintenance and those types of things. So signage, that's an example of what we would do with that. Now, it would be nice, obviously, to have another funding source if there were more development needed or other plans for that property. That property in particular should be left primarily for passive recreation anyway, so that there's not going to be a whole lot of development, but certainly we need to maintain it and make sure that it's kept up to the point where the public can actually access it and enjoy it.
I just think it would make sense that if some of that open space fund helps support, instead of taking it out of the capital budget.
And unfortunately, the impact fee is, as I understand, going away, that we use to help fund things of this nature.
On a similar theme, and I don't know if it goes in here or not, in the comp plan, did we speak to potential acquisition of land in coastal high hazard areas? So I'm just wondering either that or helping to purchase some vulnerable properties. So I don't know if that goes here, if it goes somewhere else, or if it goes in the future.
I think we've discussed in several cases, comp plan, natural hazard mitigation plan, sort of over and over, this the cost of natural hazards in town, and so there's instances where some communities are getting REMA funding for acquiring properties that have been hit over and over and over. There are, there's going to be funding necessary for rebuilding infrastructure that gets damaged. We've also talked about, CRMC has a whole set of maps that show where wetlands will migrate given sea level rise, because that's what wetlands do, they move around, and whether there's a need to sort of acquire some of that land so that we don't lose all of our coastal wetland when the sea rises. So yeah, I think all of those things we've discussed in the past, whether they go here or there or are 3 years away instead of 2, I don't know.
So I guess my question about it simply would be, is there something that is actionable for us in the next 2 or 3 years? Is there something about acquiring sensitive, climate-threatened land that we can do and should be doing in the next 2 or 3 years?
We could
advise or request that the Conservation Commission look at that as part of the open space funding criteria?
That might be a good one, because again, it's to, if the goal is to preserve open space and or reduce, public health, safety, and welfare, that might be a good option for it.
All right.
I think the other thing we could do is know what those resources are. Talk to our local leaders, but also at the national level in terms of our congressman or senator to advocate now, because I think it's something that we are going to need to do, and I think it would be way too expensive to do it with our talent funds, so we need to find other funds to be able to acquire properties that are going to be in danger. And then the other part of it is, when do you decide, which properties that you're going to acquire? It's going to be complicated in a way, because some people are going to own properties that they don't want to get rid of. And then, it becomes rather expensive. So that's my concern. So I think working towards advocating for future, even if it's 5-6 years down the road, I think we should start now looking into it and working on that.
So I would express that as convey to the federal delegation the need for federal funding to support those activities. I can deal with conveying that message. We can get letters out. We can tell folks it's important. So we're happy to do it. Good. Coordinate with the Coastal Resource Management Council regarding review of applications for aquaculture operations and evaluation of policy regarding such uses in Point Judith Pond and Potter Pond. Coordinate with. To be honest with you, we've had some experience with this one over the last couple of years. The coordination is kind of one way. We don't have an awful lot of opportunity to influence that process. So I'm not sure this objective is one that works the way we had hoped.
Yeah, I might just sort of erase this one, the way CRMC works, but we do have CRMC right in town. They're at the Stedman office building over there. So it's not a bad idea to have a good relationship with CRMC, I don't think, but I just, their regulatory process is like, we get called in when the project gets proposed. I don't see much beyond that.
So the way that this objective has been implemented at the local level is we have taken applications that we've been made aware of to the advisory bodies. They've voted a recommendation which is purely advisory, and we've conveyed those on to CRMC. It's not a horrible thing, but it's not a very... it's not, and I have no objection to our continuing to do that. Just doesn't necessarily influence the process nearly as much as I think folks might like.
One place I know there's a serious issue with this is folks on land adjacent to proposed aquaculture leases not getting any kind of notification whatsoever. And I realize that there's a kind of a disconnect between what happens in the water and what happens on land, and that doesn't really make a lot of sense because there is no disconnect between the two in reality. But the notification does not happen. So that seems like something that certainly people who live adjacent to the salt ponds would certainly appreciate.
Actually, that's actionable. We could do that. We haven't. It's not been our charge. It's not been the objective here. But we could commit to providing notice when we're given notice. We could say that if we get notice from CRMC, we're going to provide the landowners adjacent to the pond with that notice. There's nothing prohibiting it. Right. We could commit to it.
Are you talking about directly adjacent or
Actually, I think the way that we would handle it is,
Within a certain distance?
the issue is visual, so you want to make a guess at where the impact is. I mean, you don't want to necessarily be on the eastern side of Potter Pond if it's not going to affect, just because of the number of notices that you'd have to send. There are some logistical questions that would have to be worked through, but they're not insurmountable, I think.
Right, and so CRMC already has notification requirements, obviously, that's why we get notified. Yeah, they do. Within a certain space, I'm pretty sure they have notification requirement. None?
If you are a designated watershed council for the Rhode Island Rivers Council, you can request notification. You can actually require, but but you get everything for the entire state. So as far as individual landowners adjacent to an aquaculture lease, no.
So if I may, as I understand it, CRMC, when they post public notices, they send to the municipality or the governing bodies, and they post those on their website. So it's not the most effective. You have to go looking for it, but if you live on the water and are concerned about your area and your view, it's posted on their website, and it's in order of when the applications come in. Again, it's not convenient. No one's saying, hey, this is up there, but you have to go look for it.
So I'm actually starting to think about how you do this, and the easiest method of providing notice might be to develop a list locally of people who want notification, an email list, and when we receive notification, send to that email list. I'd be happy for us to commit as an objective, the town will develop a method for conveying notice to whenever CRMC is entertaining an application for aquaculture uses on the ponds. That might work.
An opt-in email notification would solve that,
It's also cheaper, which I like.
Very, very much so.
We don't need to do the certified mail thing. That sounds great. I think that's a good idea.
Continue to incorporate healthy communities design philosophies such as those identified in the Healthy Places by Design project into development review, town initiatives, and village-based planning policies.
We hope they're already there. We hope they're in the village master plans. The Healthy Places by Design was one of the best projects this town ever did. People came out of the woodwork to participate. It was really great engagement of the citizens.
I have no objection to this, objective, except for the continue to. It's so squishy.
Get rid of continue to?
I suppose I would ask, is there something you think we're not doing that we should be to implement this idea of Healthy Places by Design? Because that could be your specific measurable item. Instead of just saying, well, we'll just keep incorporating it because we do, right? And then we do it with everything. Is there something specific that you think is not actually being acted on that is important?
It's about connecting the dots.
I was going to say, maybe we should start by reviewing what it was. I, for one, kind of forgot what the recommendations are. And with new council members, that might be something.
Have the BPAC work on this?
It is village planning.
Probably could be wrapped into that one. When we develop the village, move forward on the village strategies to incorporate the healthy design.
I think a big piece of that is, sort of the active lifestyles, encouraging walkability, bikeability in town, traffic safety improvements. And I think that is obviously something we continually hear about. So perhaps an objective related to that side of the...
Yeah, because it was about... transportation, walkability, bikeability, village planning, access to recreation, and there was a healthy food component as well. Yes.
Yeah. So, yeah, maybe that could be broken down into those sort of subtopics that the Healthy Places, initiative looked at. The active lifestyles and then the access to food.
Okay. All right. The things that come to mind that we haven't accomplished yet are the introduction of gardens and community gardens and healthy food, particularly around the low and moderate income housing areas, apartments, Section 8 apartments, and the Public Housing Authority. There's been some inroads there, but I don't think we've been successful there yet. So we can come up with an objective on the foods. On the transportation, bicycle, and pedestrian stuff, the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee is now talking about a mini TIP, a transportation improvement program for South Kingstown specifically, aimed very much at bicycle and pedestrian stuff, but going a little beyond that as well. I think we can build an objective there around that focus as well. Rich, any thoughts on transportation and stuff that we ought to...
Not specifically. I know that the bicycle pedestrian group has talked about being careful that even other entities that come into town are going to adhere to some of those walkable, bikeable concepts that have come out in some recent studies and things like that. So maybe there's a way to incorporate some of that.
Great. All right. I think we've got a strategy for getting to an edited version for the council. Continue to evaluate regulatory options for allowing solar energy generation facilities throughout the community in a context-sensitive manner. I think this one is going to end up being presented to the council in the form of regulation that will be it. So I think the objective here is to present to the council a finished regulation. Continue efforts to revise the subdivision and land development regulations to increase clarity and effectiveness and address issues of importance such as stormwater management, procedural efficiency, and appropriate design and landscaping standards. I think you're going to see some of that come out of the Whitney Houston project. But on the landscaping standards and the stormwater management, I think we've got something that we need to focus on here. So what is it that we'd like to see happen in the next couple of years?
So I think this one originated because we are trying to update the regulations themselves. And we've been working on it now for at least 18 months, if not more than that. It's like the back burner thing that we put on the planning board's work session when the work session's not full of everything else. And so some of this is really just making the rules that are in place per the state law more clear. What the process is, what the steps are, who the advisory committees are, all of that stuff. Some of it is updating the stormwater management regs. I know Kayla and Rich have just recently sort of picked that back up and looking at it. We're looking at the landscaping standards. So this one originated as updating that regulation, and that will be finished within your 2 years. Absolutely, I will commit to that. Hopefully within six months. It needs to just be done because we've been working on it for way too long. So this one we could just finish that, right? And then if there's other things related to stormwater management, landscaping that you want to add, that might be a separate objective.
I think if you just want to put finish revising instead of continue efforts, if that's simple enough. And then if you want I think we'll leave that up to the planning board to come up with more ideas, and then you can bring those to us.
All right, and I believe we're at the last one. Continue efforts to enhance the subdivision and land development review process, including providing clarity to submittal deadlines and procedural steps, streamlining review where appropriate, and clarifying requirements relative to planning board decision-making. I'd actually say that this one has been accomplished. I think you guys have actually succeeded in achieving this objective in the last year or so.
Yeah, on this one, I feel like I always want to keep working on it. So yes, I think we've done a lot. We put all of our submittal deadlines online. All of the checklists have been updated, and they're all online. The one thing I would really love to see happen here that we've been talking about and throwing around is a development review map that exists on our website, where anyone can come to the town's website, pull up the map, and there'll be dots on everything that is under review by the planning board. You sort of hover over the dot, and it'll give you the name of whatever it is and what it consists of and when the next meeting date is, and then a link to the PDF you can click on and open it up. If anything, I think that could be a really great objective for us to get going, because we get so many calls, just people want to know what's going on, and if we could direct them to a visual web-based map, I think that would be great.
Yes.
I like that goal, or objective. That's a good objective.
All right, and that is, in fact, the last one.
So, those were the things that were on the list. Are there other more objectives that people around the table have on the tips of their tongue?
I just got a question to Rob, and I guess the planning board as well as Chelsea. Can we talk a little bit about the change in the height elevation as a result of the new legislation that takes effect March 1?
Sure. And you guys have just written the memo, and you've just gone through the process. I'll defer to folks who've been in this battle.
Okay. So you had your order of notice at the last council meeting. There'll be a public hearing on this at the end of February, but we can sort of talk generally about what it is and why it's necessary. In the last legislative session, there was a change to the definition of building height, and it now says that in a special flood hazard area, which is a flood zone, you measure building height not from average existing grade, which is where it's measured everywhere else, but you measure it from base flood elevation. Base flood elevation is basically the top of your pilings. Base flood elevation can include some freeboard, but it's sort of always the top of the pilings, or the lowest floor of the living space. One thing that sort of complicates all of this is that the definition said you can use what they call CRMC design elevation maps to establish that BFE. Now, the CRMC maps are great as a resiliency planning tool, but they are widely varied. They have a series of maps that depict what the elevation should be given future sea level rise scenarios. So they have a 1 foot scenario, 1, 2, 5, 7, and 10. And for each scenario, for every area of the coast, they've said, with 1 foot of sea level rise, the water depth will be this, and therefore your design elevation should be this. With 2 feet, your water depth is this, and your elevation should be this. And so it really gives the applicant for the building permit the choice of whether they want to use the FEMA map, which is the straight to day elevation, or one of the CRMC maps to establish base flood elevation. And then because you're now measuring building height from that, it's all on top. So where you used to have a 35-foot building height that included your pilings and your living space, now your 35-foot building height is all on top of your pilings. So you can imagine, with a 10-foot sea level rise scenario where they're saying your design flood elevation is 22 feet, and you add 35 on top of that, you're getting structures that are significantly taller than what you would have previously. So the planning board, we've been talking about this for months and months, tried to sort of come up with a regulatory scheme that would not only limit excessive building height, but try to preserve a little bit of the coastal community character that we love about South Kingstown. And we also wanted to address the CRMC thing, right? So one of the things we did is we said when an applicant chooses to use a CRMC design elevation map,
they need a special use permit, and they need that because we want to make sure that they're actually designing their entire building, their entire property, to be resilient to the sea level rise scenario they've picked. So if they're saying, well, we're going to elevate to 10 feet, well, you need to make sure that the water at 10 feet is not under your building. You need to make sure that you still have physical access to your property from Route 1, right? You could still get there. That your wastewater system will still be functional, that you are building your construction to the new flood zone that you will be in with 10 feet of sea level rise. So we tried to address a little bit of that too. That's, in a nutshell, what it is, and we can talk about it more at your public hearing. And I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you. I guess the only other thing I wanted to talk about is we don't normally get to meet with the planning board, and I think I know pretty much everyone, but sometimes it's like one or two people that you might not know so well. So with the opportunity that we have a work session together, is there anything that anyone on the planning board wants to share with the council, any concerns, anything that we can help with or do better?
I think we should do this more often. Peter?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we should be involved with all types of groups in the community more often. I think one thing that I think we could use some help on, and correct me if I'm wrong, is more resources. We are really hardworking board, but we don't really know the answers to everything. And it'd be really good, just the sea level one was an issue of like, we started throwing out these design ideas, and we're really not qualified to come up with these, like, there's one statement in there that says no flat roofs. Well, I've seen really beautiful houses done really well with flat roofs. So I think resources would be something that we could use to help us bring in professionals to say, hey, here's a design element that is a professional design element, or anything else besides that. It's just one example. So.
Anything else from anyone?
One other thing, and perhaps the council has discussed this in the past, for many years we have not had a community tree program, and many people will be aware of the fact that the emerald ash borer has now been found in Rhode Island. Also, there has been an incredible amount of tree die-off from gypsy moth and winter moth populations over the last couple of years. And it's going to cost us a lot of money to have to take down trees that may be dying in place. And thinking about the future, there may be some means by which we can develop a tree planting program, or have a nursery area, or come up with some kind of an agreement with a local nursery. I know that David Flanders and the Conservation Commission have been working really hard on this for many years, and really understand the complexities involved, and I would certainly encourage having a conversation with them.
Just for the council's information on that, this is a huge issue. We've got to get a handle on the forest stuff. We actually have information coming to the council on the state program, and I think it is something we ought to be looking into. It's not without expense, but we're definitely ill-equipped to deal with what's coming our way. The recent die-off of oaks has been bad. The ash is threatened at this point. We are definitely behind the curve on managing the forest. I actually think that it's tree planting, I think it's tree culling and pruning, and I think it's also training. A lot of what's out there, a lot of the forest that's out there is on private land that folks don't necessarily think of as forest and don't manage as forest. So I think that we've got sort of a three-prong approach. We've got to do what we can do with our trees and the public trees. I think we've got to help the public understand how they can manage the trees that they have stewardship over, and I think we've got to figure out how to keep the forest being revitalized.
It sounds like it's worth developing an objective around trees.
I actually think
working with.
I think it absolutely is, and we will do that.
The other thing is affordable housing. It's just, we've worked on ordinances, we have the exclusionary, it's not working great. Everybody needs to get behind it. And you can create ordinances up to me now. Getting it off the ground and getting public support and getting the town council and big problem, and it's not going to get any easier, and every year it gets more difficult. We don't have a perfect answer to it, but we need to take some initiatives as a town.
The building height and the
That's right.
subdivision timeframe, yes.
But to Peter's point, the state of California is suing municipalities. And as they say on public policy, as California goes, so goes the country. Where municipalities have failed to implement affordable housing programs that are working, the state of California is stepping in and suing those municipalities. It's a bad scene.
I think one of the things that's important, we've got a lot of challenges, whether it be affordable housing or coastal development. I think one of the things that's very important is that each time we have those discussions, we look at what are those things that the people in the town, what do they really like about this town? And what are those things that make it special? And sometimes it's easy to jump to solutions and think, well, you know, that was kind of built into our solution, our thought process. But I think it's important to have those discussions, one, to make sure we get this right, and then two, to make sure that we can articulate it to the public, why we made those decisions. So I think each time stepping back and having that discussion, what do the people really like about this town? What makes it special, and how is it applicable? We just got to continue to have that dialogue, not jump to solutions.
So I'm just going to comment on what my colleagues are saying, and I agree. And I think, we had the discussion earlier about set-asides and how the town historically has been very good to open space acquisition and setting lands aside. And clearly it helps, outsiders know of South Kingstown's interest in preserving. It's not only its history, but it's open spaces. But there also comes a point in time where we have to evaluate and say, how much is enough? And what else could we be using with those resources, financial resources, such as the incentives that I think we need to start talking about in order to provide affordable housing for the community. And I think that's the dichotomy that it's going to be a tough transition because we like open space, but is there a point in time where we put a cap? And that's a goal. And ironic as it may seem, and it may be difficult to swallow, but we have to look at that and say, okay, we need to shift our goals. And one of them is making it so that we have a dynamic community where you have young families can come in with their kids. And like Joe, my kids who are educated K through 12 in South Kingstown don't live in South Kingstown. They couldn't afford to buy. And they're both college graduates. They have good jobs, but they live elsewhere. So pains me to say that. So the dynamic of a community is based upon the fact that you can have young families start, come here, raise a family, and we all know that's a struggle, which is why they're going elsewhere. So again, it goes back to prioritization of our financial resources and really looking at what are we trying to do? Have we achieved the goals in one area where we can now shift from that area and say we need to focus on this? And that's where I think those are the tougher discussions we're going to have.
I agree entirely. I think we've done a great job with land trust and putting land into trust, and I think we need to put some money into people trust. And however we figure it out, if we need to some kind of incentive, be it tax or be it actual monetary incentive, to help young families, young professionals afford a piece of property. However we do it, it works in other places where they have a fund that's used to entice people to come. You qualify, you commit to a certain time frame in that home or in that condo, and if you sell it within that time frame, you owe the money back. If you don't, we can figure it out. But we're going to need to do something. And we put a lot of money into preserving land, and now we need a people trust.
All right, any other final comments?
I just had a couple things that I wrote down from the American Planning Association, what makes a successful community, and I think that we have talked about a lot of those things tonight. I just wanted to quickly read through them. Have a vision for the future, inventory community assets, build plans on the enhancement of existing assets, use education and incentives, not just regulation, pick and choose among development projects, cooperate with neighbors for mutual benefits, pay attention to community aesthetics, and have strong leaders and committed citizens.
I think we're doing fairly well then.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, I think, do we have public comment listed on the? Yeah, so at this point, I know we've driven most people away, but please, if you want to add to the conversation, come forward, state your name for the record. And
Hi, thanks very much. David Flanders, Conservation Commission. I just wanted to mention 3 things that are worthy of discussion that we're not going to get into at this time. But I wanted to thank both Maria and Rob for talking about what we refer to as the community forest, which is essentially by definition all the trees in town. And they're all interconnected as a forest, even though they're fragmented, even in yard to yard, towns, parks, and whatever. But they do have to be dealt with in that, comprehensive way. The community forest has major positive impacts in stormwater management, which we talked about, climate change, water filtration, carbon, nitrogen, and particulate sequestration, and the general quality of life. I refer to it as the most invisible resource that we have. We just take it for granted. And as these trees have been dying out, and John Schock gave us a list of 65 trees that need to be removed that have not, and 44 that are being taken down by the grid, and that's a financial cost as well. Each one is about $1,500 to $2,000 to take down. So one thing is that in 2014, our DEM, Division of Forestry, comprised a study of how much community forestry we have, and they mentioned the tonnage of these elements that these trees have been doing, and they put a dollar figure to it. And it's tens of millions of dollars that what you see all around you are contributing to. It is a huge resource that, we do need to invest in, and we have gotten behind in the past administration. So it's playing catch up. So thank you for bringing that up, and yes, I do think it should be an element. About URI, I don't look positively upon. I think they're a bad neighbor. It's just my personal opinion. They can increase the population of South Kingstown simply by building a new dorm. And what I see is increased traffic. And it's just not traffic. It's speeding traffic. It's running red lights traffic. I hate URI traffic. And we talked about rental properties, and I think that's a great idea. If there were some way that we could do that, but certainly not to attract URI. There has been this pilot project that's been going on for the past 20 years. It's called the Town of Narragansett. And these people we've seen the results of that, and I don't think we want that in South Kingstown. And by the way, I think the business that they attract looks to me like it is pub-driven. That's just my personal thing. The only other thing I had to mention was Marina Park. I use Marina Park for boat launching, and it's well used, and it's a great resource. I also love sitting there at the coffee shop looking out the deck. It's a great place, but the restaurant has capacity for which they do not have parking. So they're using town land for their own parking. I think we should somehow designate maybe leasing, because we talked about leasing property, parking to them. And maybe it would be hours driven. Maybe after 8, fine. Or after 9, fine. But I think that is a real problem. It is very overcrowded. They are getting it for free. And it does sometimes crowd out people with their boat trailers, because that's essentially a 2 parking place deal, the car and the trailer. And the only other thing, Steve, you mentioned that some of the open space acquisitions we've had are not open to the public. Which ones? Which ones are those?
The farm up on Commodore Ferry, just beyond Carmen Hills. Oh, you talking about Wood Farm? Which one? No.
Okay, I don't know that.
It was Carolyn Tickner's property.
Okay. Oh, yeah.
That's not open to the public.
Okay.
Pardon? She gave it to the town, but when it went before the planning board, there was no public access.
Correct.
That was part of the sale provision.
Okay. Yeah, I was unaware. Okay. Thanks.
Julia Landstreet, South Kingstown Land Trust, and I'd like to thank you all for your generosity, even though obviously in some cases it was a tad bit begrudging. We have been very good stewards of your monies, and I'm sure you all know or would like to know that of the properties that we own, a grand majority remain in private hands. They are conservation easement properties, and of the properties that we own, they are either open to the public in active agriculture, or only 30% of the land in our care is not open to the public. And in most cases, those properties are either too wet, too small, there's no road frontage, or there's no safe way for someone to park and access it, including the Tickner property, which does not have any road frontage access for someone to park and get to it. As you all may or may not know, I certainly believe that some open space is good and more open space is better. And I'm so happy and proud to be working in a community where, when given an opportunity to vote, the electorate, in the last election, it was 80% of the residents voted for the open space bond. And it's clearly a real priority for this community. If the council chooses to advocate and make changes, I look forward to hearing the public debate and input, because just as much as there is a need for affordable housing, it could be that the housing is no longer affordable because it is such a desirable community to live in because of the open space. Thank you all so much, and look forward to remain a part of the dialogue and working with both you all as elected and appointed officials and with the staff.
Hi, my name is Karina Burston. I live in Wakefield. And I just wanted to point out that a lot of the affordable housing, a lot of the quality of life arguments that come up can be enhanced by historic preservation, and I understand that's on page 8, and we didn't get to it tonight, but it overlaps a lot because there is such a thing as adaptive reuse, which makes property affordable, is also very attractive to younger residents, draws in young people to live in town. And so I think that incorporating a broader perspective as you look at these things, I hear a lot of, well, we have to do this or we do that. I think it's important to have rather than an either-or approach, that people need to have a both-and approach and start looking for innovative ways to accomplish both things. That said, I'd like to just say that if you're interested in learning more about economic development and historic preservation and how much it brings into an economy, a man called Donovan Ripkema is speaking in Bristol on February 28th, and he's done a study for them for a whopping amount of $2,500, which actually details exactly how much money they're going to save and how much economic development there will be in the town of Bristol. So he did it for the state of Rhode Island with the RIHPHC, Historic Preservation Heritage Commission, and he's done it for the town of Bristol, and I think it's an important thing to look at.
I have a few comments. I'd certainly like to build a little bit on what Dave Flanders said. But I don't know if you've heard recently in New York City, a pool house sold for something like $238 million. Is this relevant? Well, until we build a 90-story building somewhere in town, it's probably not. However, there is a hell of a lot of money around. And, for example, my daughter works for a firm that just this past year designed a $20 million house. So why do people come here and spend that kind of money? Well, I think due to the comprehensive plan and those of all of you who work to maintain the rural economy, it attracts investment like this. So how do we keep moving forward and still protect what we have? Well, certainly now that we have Route 1 as a scenic highway, I think it's very pertinent that whenever this piece of development faces the road, immediately the city roadway board and look at it and that way we can try to help select. Certainly with Mr. Flanders and his thoughts on trees along the way, certainly going to do that also. And of course, if people come here, they like to go to work or visit and go elsewhere. Near rail, we've been working to get the new rail in here. So, Steve Dora from town to the government to get there's some gossip about Amtrak, which could be offered some assistance without further gossip. I don't want to stand on Tower Hill Road. I believe just recently, that came about because one former resident of the village, Shantytown Village, off of Main, off of Tower Hill Road. She rode her electric bike, her electric scooter in the street because if she rode on the sidewalk and she came to a curb cut, the drop was so abrupt and her scooter was so because of her efforts, she wrote letters to the town and to the state, and now I think at that time it was some years ago. The bike path. I mean, again, I was looking before, I was saying at Steve Alford, where for allowing and recommending this to move forward. So today it goes, of course, on it's now in there again, and the next piece of it called 4A, you go across the street, go behind the school, a little short piece that at least it gets into the parking lot, and for the progress. This month is one of two meetings the DOT will be holding throughout the state to discuss bike paths, and something will be there again this month. But we still need one more piece, which is an extensive piece to be down to the water. So, again, it's not only recreation, it's economic development. Appreciate all the people who come to visit us and good use of the bike path. So, again, we compliment everybody for all the work that you're saying. I have no student.
Evening. Jim O'Neill. Just have a few statements. Some questions tonight or comments that we need to engage in regards to open space. Some of our federal, not only political folks, but other agencies. And I might let you know, if you've ever visited Truston Pond, U.S. Fish and Wildlife has 1,000 of those acres, all public, most beautiful property you'd ever want to take people to see. Part of our economy, our ecotourism for this area. Not only that, the State Department of the DEM, Department of Environmental Management, Audubon, Nature Conservancy, all of your farm. This is the greatest team effort to try to raise money ever you could ever assemble, New England, the nation, to put together funding to save what works so well for a community. It's phenomenal. A couple other statements here. We get into a lot of trouble over the last few years, the last few dozen years. Our zoning hasn't kept up with the comp plan. We made a lot of good ideas in that comp plan, but they weren't put into motion following the zoning. If you're familiar with Main Street, with the Larchwood and the Miller property, you'll understand that they both weren't in sync, which is too bad. I think I saw the other day the Highland Farm is for sale, so I assume our EDC is going to be looking at that. I saw a sign there. I can't tell you if it was just for the homes or if it included the whole property. I don't know if that's zoned for strictly farm or allowed for other purposes. Another question that I would have to ask, can you zone for technology only? And I bring that up because most of you weren't arguing on the South County Commons, but we thought parts of 2 of those 7 districts were going to be great commercial partners with URI, the high-tech area of URI. Didn't turn out that way, so high-tech has turned into more hotels and restaurants, which is our business. But just to tell you that we thought that's the way it was going to go at the time. Affordable housing, Bryant's in the business, I'm in the business of real estate, and we all are. We all own homes or rent homes. Affordability is not our fault. We happen to have geography. When you sit on the water, I don't care if you're in Newport, I don't care if you're in Barrington, even Warwick, on the waterfront, Connecticut, all the way down to our town, Narragansett, all the way to Westerly. Good for us if we own property and we're in the right markets, but it's not our fault that the low end of the price range is where we are now. I think Bryant asked the other day, what's our average home sale this year? Around $375,000. That makes an 80%. If that's the number we're working at, that's almost $300,000. Well, Warwick's $250,000 at their 80%. It's tough for people who live in Warwick too. And I think we've got to keep something in mind here. Nobody looks at the state here, and I'm going to thank Joe for looking at it. Market forces here are real, and things we can't change. The state level school population was 170,000. We're down to 143,000 last number. All around the state. It's not just South Kingstown. We may lose a congressional seat. What have we grown? 15,000 people in what, the last 10 years? Moving forward to the census, we may lose a House seat and lose a lot more oomph with the new House management by the Democrats. I think, boy, we've got to be aware of things like that. But again, not our fault. The rest of the world has just been a lot more active and so on and so forth. Anyway, aging, real estate. Back in 2005, 6, 7, you better believe everybody was building the over 55. That was the only business going on then. People couldn't get jobs to move after the kids graduated from high school. We were stuck with this. I mean, you cannot change the world there. The over 55 folks, they are an absolutely great economic vitality for our community as well as seniors. So I won't put the two together. Just a couple more thoughts here. Yeah, we do have to create jobs. Jobs come first. Maybe we should take a chance on one piece of property, see if we could try a 10, 12, 15 unit apartment complex or something. See, I don't know if the town could buy the property. I don't know from what I heard tonight if the town should be in the leasing business, development business. I don't know. But if the state doesn't grow, we have to be very careful about what our plans are. We don't want to just price our own folks out of this community right now. But again, demographics and market forces are the way it works. A couple other things here. You should realize that Narragansett is a seasonal college rental town. The owners of those homes, and there are 650 last time that filed with Narragansett, how many people rent out. And the owners of those homes enjoy the places in the summer, sometimes for 2 weeks, sometimes the whole summer. But imagine if URI put up dorms for another 5,000 kids. The current population of dormitories is 5,000. They could put up another 5. You'd probably have one hell of a seller's market in Eastwood Look in Narragansett. But South Kingstown is the opposite. We are summer rentals, big money down there on the water, close to the water, versus year-round. Narragansett's got those, as you know. And let's see, we'll wrap it up here. I would love to know if there's any figures here in town. I'm much higher with rental folks in South Kingstown with school children. I wish there was a way to match those two issues. Do our renters in this town have more of the school children versus otherwise? I'd love to know what we might expect with some affordable housing. And can you keep affordable housing? Is there only under 55? How do you advertise for that? Can you have families, no families, but issues that we need to discuss? And you talked about the URI, still involved, the Alumni Association. They're still hoping private investments up on the North Plains side of things. They could be condos for sale, bars, restaurants, really a retirement community, if you will, for a lot of the alumni. So those are things that we need to think about, too. So thank you very much.
Thank you. All right. Well, I think unless there's any last concluding thoughts, then we're done here. And it is 10:05. Thank you for taking part.
Thank you. So moved.